In the tense atmosphere of the packed arena, every spectator stood frozen in anticipation of the spectacle, unaware of the danger lurking around them. The show's host continues to warm up the crowd with a broad smile, confident in the absolute safety of what is happening. People's faces are distorted with fanatical delight. They are filled with adrenaline from the grandiose performance. Among those gathered, Go Taewook stands out, his cold gaze riveted on what is happening next to Yoshikawa Surara. Nearby, Ricky Harleys and his companions are observing the situation, assessing the situation with cold calculation. Suddenly, the situation escalates to a fever pitch when one of the participants suddenly takes off, attracting everyone's attention. The tension mounts as Lim A-young and her comrades peer into the arena, sensing something is wrong. Even Lim A-young's confidence begins to crack, giving way to a hidden anxiety in the face of the impending threat. And then the presenter realizes that the situation has gotten out of control, but it is too late to change anything. His smug grin instantly fades, replaced by horror in the face of imminent reprisal. Kim Tae-young's powerful blow pierces space, instantly ending the life of the arrogant presenter. Kim Tae-young himself appears out of nowhere, displaying the cold confidence of a killer. The lifeless body of the defeated man falls into the arena under a spray of blood, marking the beginning of the massacre. The stands explode with shock and panic as the full extent of the nightmare that is unfolding finally dawns on the spectators. Crying screams fill the stadium as the show's organizers realize in horror the scale of the disaster. Cody Wood breaks into a sinister grin, ready to unleash his dark power on the unfortunate. Cody Wood's dark aura fills the arena, rising into the air and wreaking havoc on the competitors. Lim Aong is in a field trying to dodge deadly spheres as the world around her collapses. In the frantic whirl of battle, Kim Tae-hyung crosses blades with his opponent, leaving no room for error. Go Taewook crushes barriers with a powerful blow, proving his destructive power in this mad chaos. Flashes of furious energy cut through the air as the battle reaches its climax. The tension builds to the limit, forcing each participant to give their all. A powerful explosion rocks the arena, raising clouds of dust and debris. The audience stands frozen in horror and delight as they watch the grand clash of forces. In the clouds of smoke, the silhouettes of the fighters bristle with readiness to repel any threat. Kim Tae-young and his comrades take up positions, instantly assessing the situation. Yoshikawa Surara can barely contain her wild passion, ready to break loose at any moment. Every movement is imbued with mortal danger and impeccable concentration. Yoshikawa Surara's gaze is full of a dangerous gleam, promising his enemies quick reprisals. Cody Wood quickly closes the distance, emitting a crushing wave of dark energy. His face is distorted by the predatory grin of a winner, leaving no hope for mercy. Meanwhile, new figures appear on the battlefield, whose presence instantly changes the balance of power. Ricky Harleys and his companion look on with icy superiority, and Yoshikawa Surara is already anticipating the long-awaited carnage, lighting up the arena with a crazy smile. Accompanied by a retinue, an influential procession confidently walks into the arena. Tensions reach their peak when the leaders of the opposing sides come face to face. A sharp lunge takes the enemy by surprise, causing them to shudder from the sudden threat. A cry of despair echoes across the arena, highlighting the scale of the nightmare unfolding. Two opposing forces stand frozen against each other in the ruins of a destroyed arena, separated only by the thin line of a truce. Kim Tae-young gives a meaningful look, realizing that the real storm is just beginning. A furious cry bursts from the chests of those who had hoped for a completely different outcome. Fear and cold sweat cloud the eyes of the shocked observers. Kim Tae-young crushes his defeated enemy with brutal superiority, leaving him no chance. Every faction present stands stunned by this display of absolute power, and he himself only smiles confidently, seeing how other people's plans are collapsing before his eyes. The pressure in the air increases as the presence of even more dangerous figures becomes tangible. The players, lurking in the shadows, merely bide their time, savoring the unfolding chaos. Meanwhile, far away, in the majestic headquarters of the leadership, the illusion of complete control is crumbling. The operations center is inundated with panicked reports and continuous alarms. Kim Tae-hyung's name fills all news channels in a matter of seconds. Analysts are frantically trying to calculate the catastrophic consequences of his actions. The command loses all composure, realizing the scale of the impending crisis. The entire gigantic complex is plunged into an atmosphere of uncontrollable chaos. After all, no strategic plan was prepared for such a scenario. At the same time, a night rain falls over the dark city, and the silence is broken by the trill of a telephone ringing. The echo of an incoming call comes from the depths of an abandoned, dilapidated building. There, among the wet debris, the wounded enemy lay sprawled in complete impotence. Coughing up blood with difficulty, he lets out only weak groans of defeat. Kim Tae-young slowly brings the phone to his ear, remaining completely calm. And with only a slight irritation on his face, he is ready to make his next unpredictable move. But instead of an answer, only a torrential rain falls from the sky, hiding the traces of the past battle. Kim Tae-young continues his conversation with Lim A-young, casually passing on valuable information about hidden enemies. He strides freely over his fallen opponents, not giving them a single extra second of his attention. On the other end of the line, the girl peers closely at the screen, trying to quickly process the received data. However, new facts make her freeze from the sudden shock and anxiety that grips her heart. Walking calmly through the pouring rain, Tae-young still has the situation under complete control. A predatory grin appears on his face, like a man who has calculated all possible outcomes in advance. But at that very moment, the silence of the alley is broken by a heavy, oppressive aura of impending danger. Cody Wood emerges from the shadows, his hat hiding a deep, murderous gaze. Taiying freezes for a second, shocked by the sudden appearance of such a strong opponent. Cody Wood's eyes flash with inhuman rage, turning into a feral, hate-filled roar. An ominous presence of dark magic appears in the air around him, distorting space. Behind the Swordmaster, a giant ghost wolf awakens, engulfed in purple flames. Driven by this terrible force, Cody Wood instantly takes off. The cold edge of his sword cuts through the veil of rain with a quick and precise movement. Concentrated, destructive energy explodes in all directions in a powerful wave. Cody Wood puts all his insane rage into this devastating attack. A deadly arcing discharge rushes swiftly towards the hero. Barely able to react to the incredible speed, Tae-Hang miraculously dodges the first blow. But the experienced swordsman doesn't give him a second to breathe, already raising his blade for the next attack. Cody Wood's eyes flash with blind fury as he puts all his strength into a deadly lunge. At the same time, Lim Ai-yong hurriedly descends the stairs, trying to convey through the communication the full danger of the situation. She screams into the phone in alarm, begging Tae-hyung to retreat before the enemies trap him. However, the heavy blade only cuts through empty air, without touching the dodging youth. Tae-young, having deftly dodged the attack, maintains impeccable composure right in the middle of the fight. The enemy doesn't even have time to realize his mistake when the tide of battle instantly changes. A crushing counterpunch knocks Cody Wood off his feet, sending him flying backwards and coughing up blood. As the swordsman collapses to the ground, Tae-hyung calmly answers into the phone that he has already found a solution to the problem. A powerful explosion rocks the street, but the guy just casually walks out of the clouds of dust. A barely noticeable predatory grin plays on his face, the grin of a man in complete control of the situation. Lim Aang on the other end of the line just freezes in shock, amazed at his inhuman calm. He walks slowly down the rainy alley, planning the next move in his dangerous game. After all, powerful opponents are against him, weaving their dark conspiracies from the shadows. Influential underground groups and shadow leaders accustomed to brutally eliminating any threat. But the scale of the danger only fuels the young man's excitement. He continues to conduct the dialogue calmly, making it clear that everything is going strictly according to his plan. Yet Lim Ai-yong cannot shake off the clinging feeling of anxiety for his life, and her fears are justified. Behind Tae-hyung's back, a wounded but not broken enemy rises heavily. Feeling the bloodlust boiling, the young man turns slightly, meeting the gaze of the swordsman ready for battle. Engulfed in a raging purple flame, Cody Wood lets out a deafening roar, gathering the last of his strength for the final blow. A powerful blast of magical energy tears through space as he unleashes his final attack. By sharpening all his senses to the limit, the magician hopes to deliver a single fatal blow. However, his opponent did not even move from his place, as if observing the insignificant fuss. A barely noticeable smile appears on Kim Tae-hyung's face, full of absolute superiority. At that moment, Cody Wood is struck by a wild horror. He realizes who he is really facing. Behind the young man, in all its terrible grandeur, a gigantic shadow of a dark entity rises. Trying to defend himself from the oppressive aura, the swordsman desperately thrusts his blade in front of himself. But his cry of helplessness is drowned out by the crushing pressure of someone else's incredible power. Meanwhile, in the gloomy silence of the underground complex, the two allies continue their journey. Go Tae-wook and Yoshikawa Sarara walk slowly down a cold, abandoned corridor. Tae-hyung finally overwhelms the enemy, rising above him in the radiance of his true power. The girl stops near a heavy metal door, peering inside with interest. Tae-wook maintains his usual composure, ready for any development. Teasing his companion, Sarara reminds him of the tournament's strict rules and possible penalties. She nonchalantly points to the locked cell, suggesting that they prepare in advance. Behind the massive barrier lies a gloomy room, plunged into deep darkness. With a heavy creaking sound, the door slowly opens, letting in bright light. Both visitors cross the threshold, carefully examining the space hidden from prying eyes. On the cold stone floor, chained with heavy chains, lies a helpless captive, and an ominous silence hangs over his frozen figure, foreshadowing imminent retribution. But the cruel shackle squeezes his body too tightly, leaving no chance for salvation, and the tormentor's triumphant look makes it clear that there will be no forgiveness. Meanwhile, far away from here, in the hot wasteland, destructive explosions thunder. Powerful shockwaves cut through the dry land, leaving only ruins in their wake. Ready to stand to the end, the two fighters take the full brunt of the blow. But the desperate clenching of teeth cannot hide the sticky fear of the monstrous force. From the clouds of settling dust, the one who brings them inevitable death slowly steps forward. The enemy, laughing at their helpless position, does not see the slightest threat in them. Realizing that there is nowhere left to retreat, the defenders prepare for the final throw. The partner's warning cry pierces the air a second before impact. But there is no time to react when the deadly shadow rises into the air. A clot of dark energy quickly falls down, crushing their defenses like dry branches. The dull crack of the splitting earth marks the final end of the battle. The warrior, having survived the crushing blow, falls onto the broken stones, exhausted. His faithful companion lay prostrate beside him, choking in dust and pain. The enemy evaluates with satisfaction the results of his cruel reprisal. With his arms folded across his chest, he challenges his next main target, Kim Tae-hyung. Meanwhile, in the center of the carefree city, life continues to flow as usual. Thousands of passers-by fussily cross intersections, mesmerized by the bright screens. Unaware that the shadow of a real catastrophe is already ready to cover their world, the tall towers of the metropolis are lost in the evening haze, hiding behind their facades, secrets that could change the course of history. Kim Tae-hyung sits on the edge of his bed, staring at his smartphone screen as alarming news reports about a mysterious incident flash by. My fingers cling to the newsfeed as a terrifying thought flashes through my head. Are the events that were supposed to break out only 3 days after the coup already gained momentum? Dark shadows of the past and ominous silhouettes of an impending threat gather in Kim Tae-hyung's mind, foreshadowing the inevitable. For a moment, his face is distorted by a predatory grin, full of strange excitement in the face of mortal danger. A dull knock on the door suddenly broke the silence of the room, causing Kim Tae-hyung to freeze in surprise. A strange premonition comes over him as the skin on his hands begins to become covered with strange, ominous growths. The door handle turns in the rays of the setting sun, opening the way for someone he least expected to meet here. Kim Tae-hyung's gaze narrows, a spark of cold calculation flashing in his dark eyes. A voice from the corridor dispels doubts, confirming the worst fears. Go Tae-wook steps confidently over the threshold, demanding an immediate conversation. The tension between them sparks, because Kim Tae-hyung clearly has no intention of following someone else's plans. Go Tae-wook's voice is firm, but there's a barely contained excitement behind it. Kim Tae-hyung looks at the uninvited guest without a shadow of fear, thinking about every step he takes. A noisy evening wind sweeps over the rooftops of skyscrapers, where two gifted individuals meet in a decisive confrontation. Go Tae-wook doesn't hide his anger, accusing his partner of betraying the team's strategy. His reproaches rain down one after another, reminding us of those who are used to acting alone. Kim Tae-hyung just raises an eyebrow skeptically, remembering Cody Wood's endless moralizing, which is already starting to make his eyes water. Go Tae-wook's voice is filled with genuine concern for the common cause and the lives of his comrades. Meanwhile, the shadow over the city grows thicker, promising a massive storm. Kim Tae-hyung smirks only slightly, barely hiding his true intentions behind that calm half-smile. He makes it clear that all their previous successes were just part of a larger combination. The news of a key member's elimination came as a bolt from the blue, leaving Go Tae-wook frozen in shock. However, Tae-hyung only shakes his head, not showing the slightest hint of regret or remorse. His icy gaze reflects the calculating confidence of a man accustomed to pulling strings from the shadows. A sudden rustling sound and a raven over the moon signify that someone else's eye is watching them. Go Tae-wook is seething with indignation, trying to get at least some explanation for this behavior. But Tae-hyung only calmly explains that, in the current game, absolutely no one can be trusted. He recalls that from the very beginning, acting alone, he took on the role of an invisible puppeteer. After all, rats have been lurking in their surroundings for a long time, ready to leak any information to their enemies. And while their team holds the lead, there is no point in huddling together and jeopardizing the entire operation. A shorthand gesture puts a bold end to this difficult conversation. Tae-hyung confidently walks towards the exit, leaving behind only a growing, booming echo. Go Tae-wook's furious cry shook the air behind him uselessly. The realization that he was simply used and abandoned instantly clouds the warrior's mind. Gritting his teeth from unbearable resentment and anger, he feels a primal force boiling inside him. A crimson aura roars out, cracking the solid concrete beneath his feet. However, the way forward is already cut off. Right before our eyes, alien teleportation begins to activate. Go Tae-wook looks with hatred at the roof of the building, where the silhouette of his former comrade disappears. Tae-hyung finally disappears in purple flashes of magic, taking his secrets into the impenetrable darkness of the night. As he moved through space, Tae-hyung couldn't shake off the disturbing thought. One of his own was leaking information to the enemy. Each recent encounter proved that their pursuers knew their steps too precisely. Having sworn to himself to find the traitor, the young man suddenly felt his smartphone vibrate. A message from Yue Young appeared on the screen, giving a brief summary of the so-called Big Three. Realizing that the situation is becoming too dangerous, Tae-hyung decides to lie low and carefully study the data. An ordinary diner in the city center becomes the ideal place to blend into the crowd. A simple tray of fast food is an excellent cover for a person accustomed to operating from the shadows. Pulling his hood down low, he tries not to attract unnecessary attention to himself. The noisy establishment bustles with its everyday life, hiding it from prying eyes. As he passes strangers, Tae-hyung maintains an outward calm, but his senses are extremely heightened, because an ambush could be lurking around every corner. Petty domestic squabbles around here are a great distraction for ordinary people. However, the bag left unattended under the table still causes a brief flash of suspicion in the guy. Taking a seat by the panoramic window, Tae-hyung settled down next to another visitor. But as soon as he sits down, the neighbor casually starts a conversation, teasing the guy for his loss of caution. Tae-hyung's heart skips a beat. That voice and that poisonous tone clearly belong to more than just a random passerby. The man breaks a slice of potato with a grin, clearly enjoying the effect it produces. Turning his head, Tae-hyung recognizes the face standing in front of him with horror. The fact that immediately comes to mind is that this dangerous psychopath should have been serving a life sentence in a maximum security prison. The air between them is tense, and Tae-hyung braces himself for the worst. Go Tae-wook suddenly freezes, grinning wickedly and thoughtfully touching his chin with his fingers. A powerful blow from a fist shatters the window glass, showering everything around with a hail of sharp shards. Kim Tae-hyung jumps up in his seat, not believing his own eyes and overcome with sudden shock. The other companions turn around in amazement, watching the chaos that has erupted outside. Go Taiwook blinks in confusion, not understanding what kind of flybit this madman. Panic instantly grips the room, and frightened people scatter in all directions, saving their lives. A sinister grin never leaves the face of the enraged Go Taiwook, radiating eerie energy. His eyes flash with a blinding light as he releases all his hidden power. A crushing wave of energy instantly knocks everyone present off their feet. Stunned people fall to the floor, powerless, losing consciousness from the crushing pressure. Go Taiwook grins triumphantly as he looks down on the stunned Kim Tae-hyung. He rips his hat off his head, revealing a look of disdain and insolence. But the next moment, heavy magical chains break loose, cutting through the air. Strong shackles instantly bind Go Taiwook's arms and legs, preventing him from moving. Kim Tae-hyung holds the ends of the chains in his hands, towering over the captive with a stern expression on his face. He coldly warns his opponent, timing the time for a sincere confession. The chains in Kim Tae-hyung's hands sparkle ominously, and the ominous aura around him does not bode well. Go Taiwook only smiles mockingly, feeling his true power awakening. A powerful dark energy explodes from within, causing his face to contort with tension. He clenches his teeth until they crunch, resisting the pressure as Kim Tae-hyung looks down at him with a cold expression. Kim Tae-hyung calmly stops his stream of meaningless excuses. The captive struggles to break free, feeling the magical chain tightening ever tighter. He shouts that without his help it will be simply impossible to find the top of the syndicate. But Kim Tae-hyung only coldly gives him exactly 3 seconds to think. The bandit excitedly promises to take him straight to the leaders in exchange for his own life. A desperate hope flashes in his eyes that the guy will fall for this tempting pretext. However, Kim Tae-hyung silently counts down his last chance, inexorably bringing the denouement closer. The realization of the inevitable makes the prisoner howl in growing panic. The boy clenches his fist, finally activating the destructive power of the spell. The fiery chains immediately tighten into a death grip, causing the enemy to writhe in excruciating pain. Through a wild cry, he, with tears in his eyes, begs for only one thing: mercy. Heavy chains crash down and knock the exhausted bandit straight onto the broken floor. He looks up in horror, realizing the absolute futility of any tricks. A barely noticeable smirk appears on the lips of the guy under the hood, and behind him, in all its eerie grandeur, the dark silhouette of Rosaria materializes. At the same time, a completely different kind of massacre is unfolding in an abandoned warehouse. The bandits inside are panicking and trying to escape from the unknown threat. But lightning-fast slashing blows catch up with the fugitives one after another. The attacker finishes off the remaining ones in cold blood, drenching the concrete floor with blood. And when the last enemy falls face down, the one who carried out this destruction appears on the threshold of the hangar. Yoshikawa Surara maintains a frightening, anticipatory expression on her face. Like a predator that has cornered its prey, she playfully discusses the current state of affairs, while the bodies of her fallen enemies lie frozen around her. Her interlocutor doubts whether Ryohei will be able to cope with such a formidable opponent as Kim Tae-hyung. But Yoshikawa Surara only grinned confidently, formulating a cunning plan in his head. She continues to develop her thought, finding a hidden benefit in the current situation. A slight smile never leaves her face, emphasizing her complete disregard for the concerns of others. After all, even if Ryohei and the other leaders of the Big Three lose in battle, this defeat can be turned to their advantage. The man in the cloak frowns, trying to comprehend the true scale of her plan. His gaze becomes alert and focused. Yoshikawa Surara is determined to use any resources, even if it means the death of others. She sees this as nothing more than cold calculation and an opportunity to gain valuable information. With one fluid gesture, she breaks the fragile distance between them. Her fingers touch the man's chin, causing him to freeze under the crushing pressure. Her eyes reflect genuine passion and the cold calculation of a huntress. An abandoned industrial complex is plunged into darkness, hiding the traces of a recent massacre. An ominous silence reigns inside the spacious hangar, lit only by the dim flames of the barrels. Go Taiwook sits in the center of the dilapidated room, surrounded by silent fighters. His stern face is distorted with tension, and his eyes show a heavy weariness. Suddenly, the silhouette of an uninvited guest appears in the shadow of the destroyed opening. The heavy tread makes even the very atmosphere of this place freeze for a moment. The bandits gathered inside don't even have time to realize who dared to disturb their peace. Only a chilling premonition makes the leader nervously swallow the lump in his throat, and the wounded ally, trembling with horror, begs them not to be stupid and to obey immediately. But before they can move, the ceiling collapses with a deafening crash. The frightened thuds retreat back, trying to take cover from the debris falling from above. At that very moment, a colossal dark energy thickens in the air, and an invisible, gigantic force literally presses the opponents into the stone floor. Through the clouds of dust, the daring, confident grin of the culprit of this destruction appears. Kim Tae-hyung lands in the very center of the chaos, as if the law of gravity doesn't exist for him. Looking down on his fallen enemies, he turns his gaze to the only one still trying to resist. The bleeding leader grips his massive blade with fury, ready to fight to the last. However, another crushing blow finally turns all his determination into ruins. The captured man can barely stay on his feet due to the powerful blast wave. He shouts out with undisguised hatred and fear, the name of the one who so easily ruined all their plans. But the young man doesn't care at all about his anger. He just slowly puts a slice of potato into his mouth. A moment later, the rebel finds himself bound tightly by shining magical chains. Lying helpless on the floor, he realizes with horror how incredible his opponent's strength has become. The unexpected question addressed to him makes him start and look up. Taeyong lounged on a chair directly across from his captive, enjoying his snack. And with a sly smile, he amiably invites his shackled enemy to share this modest meal with him. The prisoner only snaps back contemptuously, declaring that any attempts to influence his mind are useless. He desperately breaks free from the ties that have bound him, trying to prove his unwavering loyalty. However, Taeyong continues to calmly enjoy his snack, completely ignoring these hysterical cries. Just watching as the enemy writhes helplessly on the floor, barely containing the rage that had overwhelmed him. And then the guy gets to his feet, casually dropping the empty package right in front of the captive. And with icy confidence in his voice, he promises to completely free him from both the top of the organization and from the mistress herself. These words made the prisoner break out in a cold sweat, and his screams began to betray obvious fear. He lets out a desperate cry, realizing how serious his captor's intentions are. Taeyong just grins predatorily, seeing how his opponent's arrogance finally gives way to panic. The eyes of the shackled enemy widen in horror at the thought of the power hidden behind that calm smile. A force capable of turning any enemy position into smoking ruins in a matter of moments, where defeated soldiers fall helplessly onto the torn concrete, losing their last hopes of salvation, and only the desperate, insane laughter of crushed enemies is heard among the clouds of dust. After all, Taeyong breaks any resistance without the slightest effort, squeezing his opponents with a death grip and not allowing them to take even an extra breath under the weight of their irresistible power. With audacious excitement, he suggests trying out the portal right now and going to the leadership of the Big Three, to that very majestic complex of the abode, which is hidden high in the mountain fog, behind the monumental doors of which peace and tranquility have long been forgotten. After all, right on the luxurious carpets lie the bodies of those who tried to stand up to true power. And in the depths of the palace, Khazard sits on a high throne, accepting the submission of his subjects trembling before him. Did these madmen really think they could break his patience with their pathetic speculations? Instead of being admired by his southern guests, Cody Wood faces only merciless punishment. But instead of panicking, the desperate brave men suddenly leap from their seats, rushing straight into a suicidal attack. Cody Wood watches this agony with cold irony, anticipating an easy victory. The rebels freeze for a moment, looking at each other as they face their inevitable end. After all, not just their honor, but their very lives depend on the outcome of this fight. An aggressive grin never leaves the face of Cody Wood, reveling in his own superiority. His eyes flash with an ominous crimson flame, ready to incinerate impudent fools. Paradoxically, the aura, which was full of menace just a second ago, suddenly dissolves into a frightening silence. The soldiers, frozen in anticipation, look around in bewilderment, not understanding the source of the sudden alarm. A booming echo reverberates throughout the throne room, foreshadowing disaster. The huge carved doors shatter under the onslaught of an unknown destructive force. Wood splinters and shards of glass rain down on the polished floor of the throne room. A heavy, confident step heralds the appearance of a new figure at the epicenter of the carnage. An ominous purple aura envelops the hands of warriors ready to clash with a deadly blade. The hall lights up with flashes of furious confrontation, where every blow could be the last. Kim Tae-young, his face distorted with tension, rushes into the thick of things. Go! Tai-wook desperately rushes forward, declaring his right to victory at any cost. Cody Wood breaks into a predatory grin, enjoying the chaos and madness of the battle. But at that moment, Lee Jong-jae strikes a crushing blow, changing the rules of the game. A powerful wave of explosive energy spreads throughout the hall, knocking those present off their feet. Kim Tae-young and his allies barely have time to gather their strength to hold back this crushing impulse. Looking around the battlefield, Tae-young is suddenly aware of the legendary figure standing before them. Cody Wood confidently strides towards his goal, gathering a dense, dark purple aura around himself. A sinister smile was frozen on his face, and his gaze promised only quick reprisal against Tae-young. The comrades around freeze in shock, amazed by the immeasurable strength of the enemy who has appeared. There is no mercy in Cody Wood's blazing eyes, only a thirst for absolute dominance. Tae-young grips his weapon tighter, ready to take the inevitable fight head-on at any moment. However, Cody Wood is in no hurry, leisurely and mockingly teasing his opponent. Without giving in to provocation, Tae-young maintains an icy, calm, and cold-blooded determination. The tension reaches its peak when both opponents finally burn their bridges. Releasing his inner reserves, Tae-young causes his twin blades to glow with a dangerous scarlet light. In response, Cody Wood quickly takes off, putting all his madness into the attacking fist. A violent collision gives birth to a new explosion, causing the ancient walls of the majestic hall to tremble. Outside witnesses of the duel are seized with panic and try to leave the danger zone as quickly as possible. But right from the clouds of settling dust, a new threat comes out to meet them with a naked blade. Isaka Ryohei grins madly, clearly not intending to let anyone out alive. Laughing maniacally, he only adds fuel to the already raging fire of chaos. A deadly storm of crimson flashes covers the entire room, erasing the boundaries of control. And even Tae-young freezes for a moment, stunned by how crazy this fight is getting. The shockwave from their collision tears through the air, causing the ancient hall to crack at the seams. The traitor issues a bold challenge, relying on his blades in surprise. But Cody Wood just grins sinisterly, because the real battle for him is just beginning. He unleashes a colossal array of purple energy on his opponent, intending to crush him into dust. However, he displays incredible agility, cutting through the magical flow with his blades. His movements become almost invisible, like a deadly ghost. Realizing that he can't take the enemy down with a simple onslaught, Cody Wood soars to the very ceiling. Behind him, the giant silhouette of the Reaper materializes, the embodiment of true death. Obeying the will of the master, the summoned spirit raises an ancient blade from which emanates a grave-like cold. Watching this unfold, Taehyung is alarmed by how dangerous this magic is becoming. The next moment, a crushing swing of the scythe literally splits the majestic pagoda in half. The roof shatters into pieces, and both opponents fall into the outer space amidst a stream of debris. The duel continues in the air, turning into a mad dance of steel and magic. The enemy desperately tries to counterattack, putting all his strength into a crimson surge of energetic agony. But a direct confrontation with the demonic scythe turns out to be a fatal mistake. The monstrous pressure causes a deep crack to run down the blade of his sword. Cody Wood lets out a triumphant laugh as he watches his opponent's defense crumble. The renegade realizes with horror that his only weapon is about to fail. The steel cannot withstand the force and crumbles into thousands of tiny pieces with a screeching sound. However, just as Cody is about to deliver the finishing blow, he is suddenly bound by flaming chains. A sudden trap leaves Cody frozen in shock mid-attack. Kim Tae-young clenches his fist with all his might, his death grip depriving his opponent of the last chance to take a step. The crimson link snap taut, binding the dark mage's movements and breaking his pathetic impulse. Without wasting a second, Tae-young quickly dashes forward, cutting through space with flaming blades. The massive demonic spirit summoned by Cody collapses with a roar under the onslaught of unstoppable force. The dark warlock's eyes flash with a furious rage as he desperately tries to swing his scythe. But the colossal release of energy at this moment exceeds any expectations of the battle participants. Even Tae-young himself freezes for a moment, feeling the all-destructive power of the wave that swept past. A single crushing blow pierces the bone armor of the ghostly giant. Thick dust and debris slowly settle on the ruined tiers of the ancient pagoda. Those watching this fight from the sidelines sighed with relief, thinking that it was finally all over. A barely noticeable smile appears on the man's face at the thought that the terrible tension has subsided. The mercenaries hastily give orders to raise the wounded and leave the destroyed place as quickly as possible. The mutilated soldiers barely contain their groans, convulsively gulping in the dusty air of the ruins. However, the inquisitive eye of an attentive observer still notices the anxiety hanging in the air. All their insidious plans and betrayals collapsed at the very moment when they underestimated the enemy. Trying to outplay Kim Tae-hyung turned out to be a fatal mistake, for which he had to pay in full. But suddenly, the grin on his face is replaced by a wild, vein-choking horror. Cody Wood falls to his knees, bleeding profusely, while the impenetrable silhouette of the victor looms behind him, and the realization of this crushing ending plunges everyone present into real shock. Cody Wood chokes on his own blood, frantically trying to figure out exactly where it all went wrong. Memories of the clash where monstrous power spilled out from the enemy flashed through his pain-clouded mind, but even then he was confident of his victory. He remembers the metal chips that fell from their blades with every blow, sincerely believing that he was in control of the duel. And only now does the terrible, paralyzing truth dawn on him, causing his face to distort. Could it be that all this time Kim Tae-hyung was playing with him without even trying his best? Cody Wood turns around sharply, only to find his gaze locked on the cold, impassive figure of Kim Tae-hyung, standing with his back to him. He turns over his shoulder, illuminated by an ominous crimson glow, the embodiment of pure menace. Memory brings up the image of a terrifying demonic blade, the power of which grew with each passing second until the weapon crumbled under the onslaught. They rush towards each other again in a deadly dance among the silent rocks. A flash of blinding energy cuts through space, marking the culmination of this mad clash. Cody Wood's eyes widen in silent horror as he realizes the inevitability of his end. And Kim Tae-young delivers his sentence with icy calm, turning the words into a fatal blow. Kim T, a sudden cry of horror catches in Cody Wood's throat as reality begins to crumble around him. Kim Tae-young quickly closes the distance, delivering a crushing blow to the most vulnerable point. Blood and energy shards fly in all directions as the enemy is thrown back by a powerful shockwave. One of the men watching the fight freezes in place, gasping for air and not believing his own eyes. Even with his hands and feet bound, Go Tae-wook watches in horror as the tragedy unfolds. The communicator balls that broadcast this nightmare to the entire world fall onto the wounded earth with a dull thud. Cody Wood falls to his knees, bleeding profusely, while the impenetrable silhouette of the victor looms behind him. And the realization of this crushing ending plunges everyone present into real shock. While the usual order was collapsing on the battlefield, a deceptive silence reigned over the rain-drenched metropolis. In a luxurious penthouse, far removed from the bloody drama, life flowed in its usual rhythm of profit and pampering. The peace of the local elite seemed unshakable, hidden behind panoramic glass and soft light. The mighty Chinese hunter enjoyed a moment of solitude in the company of his companion. There was no indication that news from outside would disrupt this measured order. However, their quiet idyll was suddenly interrupted by an insistent signal. The sound of the night call instantly destroyed the atmosphere of carefree luxury. Reaching out to the flickering screen, he had no idea of the scale of what had happened. Walking over to the window overlooking the blazing city, he pressed the receiver to his ear. The words on the other end of the line sounded too serious to be a mere formality. Elder Changlong was on the line, speaking from the depths of a secret complex. The news of the defeat and fall of the strongest made the hunter freeze in mute amazement. The grim news confirmed only one thing: the balance of power in the world had changed once and for all. Meanwhile, in the arena of the past battle, crimson flashes of magic finally sealed the outcome of the battle. Kim Tae-young felt a new, alien power fill his body in that moment of triumph. Without the slightest hesitation, he began to absorb the abilities of the defeated enemy. Taking power from the innocent was against his morals, but the dark criminals deserved no mercy. The mysterious voice he had heard in the midst of the mad battle still echoed in his mind. He only had to get to the truth through experience and reveal the full essence of his awakened gift. And the losers could only laugh hysterically from impotence, realizing the full horror of their inevitable collapse. With Tak and the other villains neutralized and sealed, Kim Tae-young could breathe a sigh of relief, but it was too early to relax. The defeated enemy desperately tried to hold on to the remnants of his pride, but Kim Tae-hyung simply brushed off the threats, demonstrating absolute superiority. Using his unique abilities, he locked his opponent away, rendering them a helpless target under the weight of a merciless sentence. Kim Tae-young responded to any indignation and hysteria with unwavering composure, fully understanding that this opponent no longer posed any threat. The main problem was the remaining two targets, hiding somewhere in the shadows. Kim Tae-young frantically went through fragments of other people's memories, trying to isolate bits of information about the enemy's secret hideouts. However, the opponents were cautious and probably guessed that they were being mercilessly hunted. Meanwhile, on the third day of the Asian-friendly match, a new scandal erupted. The mysterious disappearance of a top Chinese player has shaken the global community. The Chinese government, in a panic, has appealed to other countries for urgent assistance in finding the missing man. Kim Tae-young, suddenly interrupting his thoughts, abruptly rose from his bed from the sharp sound of an incoming notification. Looking at his phone screen, he realized that he couldn't stay away any longer. An incoming call from an old acquaintance was lit up the screen, and he clearly had no intention of giving him a break. Kim Tae-hyung contacted Go Tae-wook to seek his support in this dangerous undertaking. Arriving at the meeting place, Kim Tae-young greeted his silent ally with his characteristic confidence. He looked at him skeptically, doubting the wisdom of such a risky undertaking. But Kim Tae-young only smiled mysteriously, making it clear that it was too late to retreat. Before their eyes, one of the city's elite buildings rose majestically, shrouded in an ominous aura. My intuition told me that this was where one of the enemy's key figures was hiding. Having compared the coordinates with the data obtained earlier, the partners were convinced of the correctness of their choice. Kim Tae-hyung tried his best to prove his loyalty by claiming to have obtained valuable information. He tried to convince his interlocutor that he was sincere and not an enemy agent. But he threw a harsh accusation straight in his face, tearing off the mask of dubious trust. However, this was only the tip of the iceberg that was hiding the recent telephone conversation. Tae-hyung initially assumed that the threads of the conspiracy led directly to Japan. However, the person on the other end of the line stunned him with completely different news. It turned out that one of the spies made a deal with the enemy only to pay off debts. But this raised a new question: how did the enemies know his exact coordinates? The girl, with a slight smirk, only confirmed his worst fears. Tae-hyung realized with horror that there were two traitors from different sides operating in their squad. However, no one was planning to immediately arrest the exposed agent. Having allowed him to continue to act, the hero decided to turn someone else's trap against the conspirators themselves. The unsuspecting spy at this moment was already celebrating his victory. With a sly grin, he openly admitted that he had deliberately lured the guy to this place. After all, the strongest fighters of the national level were already waiting for him inside, ready to eliminate him. But instead of being scared, Kim Tae-young just calmly prepared for battle, releasing scarlet black magic. At that very moment, a catastrophic surge of energy literally tore apart space. A powerful blow to the dust destroyed all the installed traps and fortifications. By easily blocking the threat, Tae-young demonstrated a strength that had increased dramatically since their last encounter. And the traitor could only scream in wild horror, realizing what kind of monster he found himself in front of. The ally looks at him with distrust, but Kim Tae-hyung only grins ominously. It's much easier to demolish the entire building to the ground, leaving the enemy no chance. A fallen and bloodied opponent is suddenly discovered among the picturesque ruins. He curses furiously, not believing his own defeat. The partner is almost speechless at such impudence, breaking into hysterical laughter. The traitor continues to spit, threatening with punishment from heaven. But Kim Tae-hyung only dismissively throws out the name of the true customer. The defeated enemy freezes in shock, realizing the scale of the disaster. And the atmosphere around is heating up to the limit under the heavy gaze of the ally. He point-blank reminds the traitor of all his dirty sins. Rage clouds the attacker's mind, causing them to rush forward in blind rage. The most powerful counterattack causes terrible pain, knocking all the strength out of him. Kim Tae-hyung freezes for a moment, struck by the power of the hidden effect. The pain pierces every cell of the body, causing the blood to boil in the veins. The flash of pain deafens and disorients, covering you completely. Even powerful passive defense can barely cope with the colossal mental pressure. Cody Wood suddenly emerges from the shadows of the ruins, shrouded in an ominous aura. The gloomy magician looks at what is happening with disdain, considering the fuss pointless. The true purpose lies much deeper, among the ashes and destruction. After all, in comparison with the true strength of the enemy, all these pathetic tricks are not worth a dime. The quiet solitude of the gazebo is deceptive, because destinies far greater than those that appear at first glance are decided here. Lim Aeon touches Go Tae-wook with concentration, channeling healing energy that can heal even the deepest wounds. Her words convey a mixture of respect and hidden danger, as the enemy she faced was far from simple. The energy gently envelops the fighter, causing him to freeze in amazement at the power that flows through his body. But behind this apparent concern lies a predatory calculation capable of turning any ally into an obedient pawn. The calming gesture only increases the internal tension, leaving no doubt about the girl's true intentions. Go Taiwo clutches his head in confusion, trying to comprehend the scale of the madness that is happening. Cold sweat breaks out on his face as the full depth of the trap he has prepared dawns on him. The sudden glint in the eyes reveals a predatory nature, thirsting for blood and destruction. 3 fingers raised, marking a new frontier in the conspirators' ruthless plan. The leader of the organization looks around at those gathered, confidently declaring his grandiose ambitions. A monopoly on gates and magic crystals is the ultimate goal for which this deadly game is being started. 5 mighty warriors line up before him, forming the vanguard of the coming storm. Yoshikawa Surara just smirks because for her all this politics is just an excuse to have a good fight with a strong enemy. Ricky Harley remains dangerously calm, hoping for the success of this risky venture. Lee Jongjae stands to the side, showing complete indifference to the ambitions of others. Lee Jongjae's cold gaze makes it clear that his own interests lie far beyond this conspiracy. The terrible shadow of the past and the thirst for blood relentlessly haunt him, feeding his dark power. Meanwhile, the order has already been given, and the cold voice demands only one thing: Kim Tae-young's head. A mysterious smile in the shadows completes this picture of a sinister conspiracy, foreshadowing imminent bloodshed. But before the plot can be put into action, another rival is already rushing towards Kim Tae-young, trying to deal the fatal blow. However, at that very moment he is overcome by pure, uncontrollable fear. The air is torn apart by a monstrous pressure, and a giant blood-red dragon appears behind Tae-young. The piercing roar of the devilish creature shakes the entire space around. The attacker is horrified to realize that his strongest ability has proven completely useless. This power exceeds any limits of ordinary players. Before him is a power beyond human capabilities. Tae-young just stares at the enemy with a cold expression, having figured out the essence of his sealing skill. A predatory, anticipatory smile spreads across his face. And with the promise of putting this ability into action, he directs devastating energy at the enemy. A deadly vice of scarlet aura tightens its grip around the victim. The enemy screams in helplessness as a flurry of crimson slashes engulfs him. A powerful blow falls from above, leaving the enemy no chance. When the dust clears, all that remains on the cracked earth is a blade embedded in the ground. Tae-young slowly picks up the weapon left by the enemy. Having assessed the excellent sharpening of the trophy, he smirks, realizing that such a valuable blade will clearly come in handy. The opponent's losses are catastrophic. 2 key enemy fighters are knocked out of action at once. Looking over his defeated enemies, Tae-young realizes that victory in the tournament is almost within his grasp. The only thing that worries him is the suspicious silence of the Japanese representatives. The sudden hum of blades breaks the silence, causing him to look up to the sky. A black helicopter circles high above him, heralding the arrival of new participants in this game. Falling rapidly from a height, Yoshikawa Surara tears through the air with his swift attack. Kim Tae-young barely has time to raise his head, stunned by the sudden appearance of the uninvited guest. With a deafening roar, it crashes to the ground, causing the ground beneath our feet to crack. The blast wave raises clouds of dust and debris, forcing the boy to cover his face. Her silhouette with a creepy, insane smile appears through the clearing fog. In public, she skillfully plays the role of a compassionate healer, bringing healing to the suffering. An immaculate saint, whose pure light attracts crowds of grateful people, whose meek appearance and prayers inspire sincere awe in those around him, and only a select few know that behind this shining facade lies only blind, fanatical worship. Tae-young just chuckles nervously, fully understanding the true, frightening essence of her nature. An attempt to find out how exactly she found it is met with arrogant and haughty laughter. The tension rises, and a chilling feeling of apprehension makes him shudder involuntarily. The girl's serene appearance only emphasizes the absolute confidence with which she acts. Tae-young peers at her intently, trying to anticipate the next move of his dangerous rival. Standing in the very center of the gouged-out crater, she begins to preach about the imperfections of this world. And with a mad glint in her eyes, she declares that everyone around her is obliged to fall prostrate before her. In her distorted fantasies, people's salvation lies only in unquestioning veneration of her figure. Tae-young is momentarily speechless at such blatant absurdity. Only Surara's sinister grin makes it clear that she will not back down from her insane mission. But the sudden screeching of brakes and the squeal of tires from approaching cars makes him turn around sharply. People in suits pour out of the opened doors, and Kim Tae-young initially mistakes them for ordinary passers-by. However, their empty, scarlet-glowing eyes quickly reveal the terrifying truth. These people are nothing but helpless puppets. Towering over the shattered land, Surara only enjoys his opponent's confusion. With a flick of her fingers, she gives a brutal order, ending any chance of a peaceful outcome to the meeting. A crowd of possessed people instantly rushes at Tae-young, covering him from all sides. Surara, with a sadistic grin, sees this as nothing more than a meek acceptance of her so-called salvation. Tae-young realizes with horror that the mad warrior is using innocent people as human shields without a twinge of conscience. Caught in the grip of a moral dilemma, he realizes the hopelessness of his situation. Meanwhile, in another part of the metropolis plunged into night, an equally eerie scene is unfolding. The guards inside the building freeze in a sudden sense of alarm. The high-rise complex is illuminated by an ominous purple glow, isolating it from the outside world. It was this powerful barrier that hid what had been sought for too long. But the realization of the solution that had come was interrupted by a quiet rustle behind me. The next moment, the partner looks in surprise at the decapitated body collapsing on the floor. Behind him stands a creepy, masked stranger, holding his victim in an iron grip. The cold, devoid of humanity look of the killer leaves no hope for mercy. Paralyzed by wild fear, the guard just stands helplessly before his inevitable death. A merciless blow, and another wife is instantly cut short in a bloody flash. Heavy drops stain the polished tiles, erasing the last traces of resistance. Stepping over the mutilated corpses, the uninvited guest confidently walks further into the depths of the complex. The tension in the air reaches its peak as a new, formidable opponent enters the fray. Space trembles, and a powerful teleportation rift reveals to the world a figure in a sinister mask. His cold, calculating gaze from behind his high-tech visor does not bode well. The new arrival assesses the situation in one tenacious movement, ready to use all his destructive power. Meanwhile, Kim Tae-young finds himself in the midst of a relentless attack, surrounded by enemies on all sides. The ground is literally slipping out from under the feet of frightened people, trapped in a deadly trap of alien cruelty. Yoshikawa Surara watches this chaos with a chilling, insane grin on his face. For her, the suffering of others is just an amusing spectacle before the culmination of a bloody performance. But Kim Tae-hyung has no intention of surrendering to the mercy of a crazy sadist and instantly seizes the initiative. Blow after blow, the defenders fall to the ground, unable to withstand the crushing pressure of superior forces. Yoshikawa Surara feels the noose around her neck tighten with inexorable force. Kim Tae-young turns the enemy's power against them using the shining chains of vengeance. With a powerful jerk, Kim Tae-young weaves every link of the red-hot chain into a deadly dance. Yoshikawa Surara chokes on his own blood as the devastating blow hits its target. Cold-blooded triumph is reflected in the eyes of Kim Tae-young, who holds on to victory on the very edge of the abyss. A moment of blinding shock paralyzes the enemy, wiping the arrogance from her distorted face. The lifeless bodies of the fallen comrades lay frozen on the cold stone chips. But it's too early to relax. The enemy is launching a treacherous attack from behind, planting strange and dangerous seeds. A flash of blinding flame tears through the darkness, unleashing a deadly threat hidden in the bud. Giant roots crash through the ground, turning the battlefield into a chaos of ruins and flying debris. The shockwave blows away the fighters, throwing them into the air like limp puppets. A blinding flash illuminates the battlefield, where a colossal tree emerges from the broken earth. Kim Tae-hyung looks at the giant roots in amazement, realizing the scale of the impending disaster. Holding the injured Lim Ae-yeon in his arms, Kim Tae-young is terrified and feels a searing pain in his chest. Turning around at the rustle, he sees a familiar silhouette and freezes from the unexpected discovery. Yu Ae-yeon strolls leisurely through the ruins, mockingly shaking dust from her shoulder and disdaining others' attempts to play at nobility. At this moment, Yoshikawa Surara, with a feral grin on his face, demonstrates his insane superiority. Grabbing Lim Ae-yeon by the throat, an enraged Kim Tae-young loses control of himself. Lim Ae-yeon unleashes a furious scream, unleashing the destructive energy hidden within, revealing her terrifying true self. Yu Ae-yeon spreads her arms out to the sides, enjoying the chaos and warning of imminent retribution. With a mad glint in her eyes, Yoshikawa Surara demands that Kim Tae-young accept her bloody salvation. Sharp tree branches quickly cut through the air, surrounding the frozen fighters. Yu Ae-yeon throws down the gauntlet with disdain, accusing her opponents of hypocrisy and empty threats. A flash of crimson energy washes over Kim Tae-young, awakening an ancient and dark power. Yoshikawa Surara suddenly freezes in the face of a nightmarish vision as terrifying faces rise from the depths of his consciousness. A terrible spasm pierces her body, causing her to choke on blood under the onslaught of monstrous pressure. She tries to stay on her feet, but the ominous illusion breaks her from the inside. Bloody tears cloud her eyes, blurring the line between reality and madness. Kim Tae-young's mighty call rises above the battlefield, unleashing the full force of his wrath upon his enemies. Beaming with overflowing energy, Kim Tae-young prepares to deliver the finishing blow, while Yoshikawa Surara screams in horror, losing all hope. Having bound the captives with shining chains, the crushing magic drags them along with it into a deep abyss. The powerful impact literally drives the earth layers, creating a gigantic wave of destruction. The settling dust reveals only a mangled earth, strewn with the debris of a once majestic battlefield. The defeated enemies lie helplessly on the dry ground, bound by Kim Tae-young's magical shackles. The sunset sky freezes for a moment, as if giving the heroes a short respite after the brutal clash. Kim Tae-young stands proudly over the broken Yoshikawa Surara, his heavy gaze unwaveringly directed at her. He doesn't hide his slight surprise, because this girl's resilience exceeds any human limits. With difficulty rising from the ground, Yoshikawa Surara tries to gather the last drops of fading energy. Her gaze flares with a mad flame, and a desperate grin blossoms on her wounded face. Sitting quietly next to her, Kim Tae-young just watches her unwillingness to give up. The girl is overcome with confusion. The enemy's unshakable confidence begins to genuinely frighten her. However, the mysterious smile of a man who has calculated everything in advance appears again on the young man's face. There is not a shadow of doubt left in his eyes, only absolute superiority and unshakable calm. But at that moment, right behind her, a colossal entity awakens. the majestic and mysterious king. Rosaria's demonic whispers echo in my mind, urging me to put absolutely everything on the line. Kim Tae-young just raises an eyebrow in cold blood, ready to meet any threat head-on. Yoshikawa Surara lets out a desperate cry and casts aside his last fears of imminent death. She rises resolutely to her feet, calling upon the full power of her transcendental patron. Concentrating a blinding cloud of energy in her palms, she forces the ancient creature to open its eyes. The king's heavenly light covers the entire area, ready to unleash sacred wrath on the fearless youth. Yoshikawa Surara is triumphant, already anticipating how he will take someone else's incredible power for himself. Her face is distorted by a mad grin, intoxicated by the thirst for an easy victory. But at that very moment, darkness and an endless sea of crimson blood open up before her, leading to the ancient throne. At the top of a giant tower of skulls sits the true ruler of this darkness. He only smiles condescendingly, seeing the audacity of the mortal who dared to encroach on his power. The lust for profit on Surara's face instantly gives way to a chilling primal fear. Crimson waves of a monstrous aura crush her will, forcing her to realize her insignificance. The girl convulsively clutches her chest, unable to contain the cry of despair escaping. Obeying the master's gesture, a terrible creature with 100 burning eyes rises from the abyss. Surara finds herself locked in a death trap with no escape, and the destructive power of darkness absorbs her in the blink of an eye, putting an end to this battle. At that very moment, Kim Tae-young, eyes wide open, bursts out of the nightmarish nothingness. He wakes up in a hospital bed, breathing heavily and trying to comprehend what is happening. Looking around, the young man realizes that he is within the walls of a ward. Suddenly, the door swings open, and Lim Aeong appears on the threshold. The girl greets her comrade, who has come to his senses with genuine relief on her face. She tells how yesterday his entire family came running in panic after learning about what had happened. Tae-hyung realizes that he was unconscious for quite a long time and missed the end of the battle. Remembering his deadly opponent, he anxiously asks about the fate of Yoshikawa Surara. Meanwhile, the defeated enemy lies unconscious among the rubble, completely deprived of strength. But amid the chaos, new, far more frightening news emerges about the disappearance of other key figures. Waking up in the hospital, Kim Tae-young tries to comprehend the scale of what happened. His mind is still clouded by the weight of the recent battle, and a bad feeling is brewing in his chest. It seemed like just a moment ago he was unleashing his crushing, raging power, burning his enemies to ashes. And this oppressive memory of the uncontrollable flame does not give him peace for a second. Ayan's caring touch brings him back to reality, giving him a fleeting sense of safety. But the silence of the hospital room is unceremoniously broken, forcing everyone present to turn sharply towards the door. A worried Cody Wood appears on the threshold, his menacing appearance now replaced by extreme anxiety. He brings news that instantly makes you forget about peace and respite. It turns out that not only individual allies but also the entire elite team of New Korea have disappeared without a trace. The news of this catastrophe spreads quickly, causing even those accustomed to constant threats to shudder. Unable to stay away, Kim Tae-hyung tries to get out of bed despite the protests of his comrades. He understands perfectly well that delay now is like certain death for those who find themselves in trouble. After all, the images of the strongest fighters who may now be dead or captured are still before our eyes. A strong confidence in his own strength and duty makes the hero overcome the weakness of his wounded body. Cody Wood desperately tries to hold him back, appealing to common sense and reminding him of his fragile health. At this moment, the door of the chamber swings open again, revealing new, unexpected guests ready to block his path. Kim Tae-young's family and friends, filled with fear and relief, tearfully beg him not to risk his life. At the sight of those he so desperately protected, the young man's heart stops for a moment, bound by sincere concern. And standing behind her, Yue Yeon only smiles warmly, admitting that it was she who called them to protect her hero from recklessness. The heavy silence in the ward is broken by a muffled cry when those he was least expecting suddenly appear on the threshold. Kim Tae-hyung freezes, watching as his loved ones burst into the room with obvious fear in their eyes. In their eyes, one can read a silent question and genuine horror, as if in front of them was not just a person, but a ghost. The entire group, stunned by what they saw, was unable to find words at once and only looked anxiously at what was happening. But the young man himself, dressed in hospital pajamas, only mysteriously closes his eyes, as if immersed in his own thoughts. There is a slight, barely noticeable shadow of a smile playing on his lips, which seems completely out of place in such a tense situation. He breaks the silence with a cold and peremptory order that leaves no room for argument or objection. The gaze of his interlocutor, directed straight at the young man, is full of confusion mixed with undisguised anxiety, and Yu Ae-young, standing a little further away, maintains an eerily calm and even ironic look, enjoying the moment. Despite the general tension, Kim Tae-young's features reveal a confidence bordering on unshakable superiority. However, those who came for him cannot hide their confusion in the face of inexplicable changes in the hero's behavior. One of the comrades' eyes fill with tears and his lips tremble. He still cannot fully comprehend what exactly is happening. His hand twitches involuntarily, betraying a strong internal excitement that he can no longer contain. But Yu Ae-young only laughs loudly, mockingly throwing out a remark that tears and tenderness are clearly unnecessary here. She seems like a true puppeteer, masterfully pulling the strings while others try to make sense of the chaos of feelings. Kim Tae-young only lets out a short breath, not hiding his irritation that his plans are once again running into human weaknesses. At that very moment, reality around us shakes. Somewhere in the distance, as if in another dimension, a scene of a bloody clash is playing out. Flashes of furious energy tear through the earth, marking the beginning of a battle in which there is no room for mercy. One of the warriors falls, struck by an invisible blow, and his cry of pain is drowned out by the roar of the gaping abyss. Against the backdrop of a blazing sky, the enemies watch the fall of the defeated one, coldly calling his name as if crossing a person off the list of the living. Cody Wood raises his crimson blade with a cold grin, making it clear that there is no more time to think. He brazenly offers the captive a deal, promising to spare his life in exchange for a humiliating oath of allegiance. But even in the face of imminent death, the comrades refuse to bend their knees before the arrogant enemy. A fierce fire of defiance flashes in their eyes, erasing the last doubts. Cody Wood merely watches this scene with feigned admiration, enjoying the desperation of the victims. The tension reaches its peak when the heroes realize the scale of the mortal threat looming over them. Fear grips the body, and the dilated pupils reflect the gloomy figure of the executioner. Cody Wood looms over them like a punishing shadow, emitting a suffocating wave of demonic energy. The fighters' faces are distorted with horror under the weight of this overwhelming pressure. The grip of invisible fetters tightens on the throat, squeezing out the last bits of air and forcing the person to choke on blood. Meanwhile, Yoshikawa Surara watches the massacre with a terrifying, mad smile on his lips. In her shining eyes, one can read only a bloodthirsty anticipation of a new massacre. The trapped victim clings frantically to life, realizing the hopelessness of his situation. Shadows of past sins flash in my memory, when betrayal became the only ticket to survival. But even now, on the brink of death, comrades find the strength to extend a helping hand to each other. The voice breaks into a scream as fear clouds the eyes, threatening to completely break the will. They rush forward, ready to desperately defend their fallen comrades until their last breath. Every cell in the body screams about danger, but it's too late to retreat. As if in prayer, the fighter raises his trembling hand, begging for mercy that is not destined to happen. Tears of despair mix with blood as reality finally reveals its cruelest face. The three survivors can only stand frozen in horror before the unknown force filling the space. However, the enemy does not even think of showing compassion, only mockingly watching their helplessness. A thirst for reprisal flashes in his scarlet eyes, and a contemptuous grin freezes on his lips. A slight snap of the fingers becomes the signal for a death sentence. Hundreds of crimson blades materialize in the skies directly above the heads of the doomed, ready to fall down. The survivors look up to the sky in horror, realizing the scale of the inevitable catastrophe. The fighter, frozen in shock, doesn't even have time to finish his thought, struck by this deadly spectacle. With a mad laugh, the executioner waves his hand, sending a flurry of blades straight towards the target. The space is filled with the whistle of deadly steel closing around helpless victims. Desperate cries are drowned out by the roar of the falling scarlet avalanche. Reveling in his easy victory, the attacker is already preparing to deliver the finishing touch. But the next moment, his confidence instantly collapses, and his gaze freezes in surprise. The space around him is distorted, drawing him into a dark abyss of alien mental pressure. The darkness comes to life with nightmarish images, materializing bared jaws and piercing, watching gazes. Breaking free from the oppressive pressure, he smirks again, refusing to back down. At that very moment, Kim Tae-young falls upon him from the heavens, summoning the gigantic power of the Twilight Spirit. However, the enemy only becomes even more ardent as he meets the attack head-on. Concentrating all his rage, the hero delivers a crushing blow deep into the enemy's defense. A powerful blast wave tears through the earth, covering everything around with a column of flame and dust. And when the smoke gradually clears, a steadfast silhouette emerges through the veil, ready to fight to the very end. Ricky Harleys looks after his departing enemy, stunned by his sudden disappearance. He doesn't have time to launch a single attack, because the enemy chose to immediately flee. Annoyance overcomes him, but there is no time to waste. The squad must continue on its way, for their true purpose lies deep where the earth trembles with dark energy. Ahead, a majestic view of the gigantic tower of the impenetrable dungeon opens up. This ominous place rises in high tiers straight into the crimson skies of the abyss. The wounded allies are barely holding on to consciousness, struggling to bear the weight of their injuries. However, Kim Tae-young quickly takes control of the situation, generously healing the victims. The stunned companions only silently watch the ease with which he saves the life of his comrade. Lim Ae-yong stands frozen in amazement, completely unable to understand the true nature of his abilities. Tae-hyung, however, remains completely calm, making it clear to everyone that there is no reason to panic. A grin of complete confidence in his own superiority shines on his face. The partners can only look at each other in surprise, shocked by such carelessness. But even the most dangerous labyrinth loses its threat if you know its secrets. Deadly traps and terrifying monsters usually leave no chance for outsiders. And yet, in this dark and merciless place, Tae-hyung feels at home. With incredible grace, he rushes through hordes of enemies, masterfully cutting them to pieces. Every movement is calculated to perfection, and reflexes outpace any lightning-fast attacks. Lim Ae-young strives to keep up, wondering how he knows the algorithms for each stage. And Tae-hyung just smiles slyly, because he has memorized thousands of survivor reports down to the smallest detail. Continuing their victorious march, the team confidently advances towards the final test. The last guards stand in the way, but the barrier collapses under the onslaught of a swift attack. Kim Tae-hyung skillfully deals with his opponent, cutting through the air with a dangerous lunge. With a smooth step, the group overcomes the gloomy path, plunging into the ominous atmosphere of the dungeon. They stop in front of a spacious hall where a mysterious energy gap flickers. The blue vortex pulsates with primordial power, drawing the gaze of its companions. Lim A-Yan and her comrades freeze in tension, assessing the scale of the threat that has arisen. Only Kim Tae-young remains unperturbed, radiating a strange, unshakable confidence. He steps forward with determination, reaching out his hand towards the unstable energy source. His mighty companions follow him obediently, forming a reliable protective shield. A sudden, sharp sound makes Kim Tae-hyung alert and turn around sharply. One of his comrades calls out to him, expressing blind devotion and a willingness to atone for any sins. Kim Tae-young closes his eyes, enjoying the moment of triumph and the complete submission of those around him. But the next second, the portal explodes in a blinding, destructive wave of magic. A powerful blow throws Kim Tae-young back, knocking the air out of his chest. He falls to the cold floor, looking around in confusion at the chaos around him. His eyes reflect genuine horror at the realization of sudden collapse. Oddly, it's this about the other mace, not who, in knows a value ways to go over entirely, and who immunology individuals of engine. The air of the ancient arena shook with a sudden surge of dark energy, causing Kim Tae-young to freeze. The stone slabs directly beneath his feet became covered with a network of glowing golden cracks. And the next moment, a gigantic red dragon burst out of the rift, filling everything around with fire and debris. Tae-hyung recoiled in shock as he looked at the creature that had literally appeared out of nowhere. The monster let out a deafening roar, from whose mouth sheaves of flame burst. These legendary creatures have been considered since ancient times as the embodiment of catastrophe, capable of wiping out entire kingdoms from the face of the earth. Even their newborn cubs possessed incredible S-rank strength. What can we say about adult ancient lizards, whose power was beyond the pale and reached the SS level? Cold sweat broke out on the boy's forehead as he fully realized the scale of the threat. The dragon loomed over him like a giant shadow, blazing with rage and an insatiable thirst for blood. There was no way back. The space around was rapidly turning into a hellish ashes. The enraged beast opened its mouth wide again, ready to incinerate the impudent mortal. A powerful explosion of fiery elements shook the walls of the great hall. However, when the flames died down a bit, Tae-young's silhouette was still standing among the solid wall of fire. Casting aside all fear, he rushed straight into the attack with a cry, wrapping his hands in shining chains. A crushing blow erupted, delivered with incredible speed, contrary to all laws of physics. Golden chains swirled around the monster's neck, restricting its movements and burning its scales. Tae-young made one deep cut after another with lightning speed, slicing through the monster's flesh with his flaming blade. A cheeky grin played across his face at the first successful attack in this mortal combat. But the dragon himself became incredibly furious at such impudence, ruining all of the guy's plans. The monster's furious blow shattered the stone floor into splinters, narrowly missing Kim Tae-young, who dodged it. The guy instantly regrouped, continuing his rapid movement under the hail of debris. Igman had no intention of giving his enemy a second to breathe, unleashing all his bestial fury on him. Kim Tae-young's face was distorted with pain and tension, but he stubbornly continued to fight. The powerful attack threw the guy back again, causing him to literally plow through the stone chips. Every breath was difficult, and blood was streaming down my face, but my will to win only grew stronger. Igman raised his hand, calling upon the crushing elements for the final blow. A red-hot ball of pure energy erupted from his fingers, rushing towards its target. The explosion shook the vaults of the hall, raising clouds of dust and hot fragments into the air. However, the flames dissipated too quickly, revealing an unexpected turn of events. Igman's powerful paw covered the distance in the blink of an eye, firmly clinging to the boy's throat. Igman's gaze radiated a chilling fury, leaving no chance for mercy. Kim Tae-young gasped from the wave of pain that surged out from him, feeling the strength leaving his body. The dragon youth lifted his opponent off the ground without the slightest effort, pinning him to the column. In the heat of battle, Igman didn't even notice how the situation began to get out of control. Kim Tae-young's face, distorted with pain, expressed silent despair. Igman's glittering yellow eyes stared at the fallen enemy with contemptuous triumph. Kim Tae-hyung's determined gaze pierced the veil of pain, searching for a gap in the monster's defense. The guy's stone armor creaked, but at the last moment his hand intercepted the enemy's wrist. Igman's eyes widened in shock as the situation instantly reversed itself. Before he could realize his mistake, the counter-impulse literally knocked all the arrogance out of his body. The crushing blow sent the dragonid flying across the hall along a bright burst of energy. With a deafening crash, it crashed into the stone floor, raising a cloud of dust and debris. Rising and wiping the blood from his lips, Igman stared at his opponent with furious bewilderment. In the center of the foggy haze stood the boy he had recently considered easy prey, unwavering. His wounded pride made him strain his strength again, but the atmosphere in the hall had already changed irrevocably. Rosaria watched this tense duel from the shadows, savoring every moment. A predatory grin spread across her lips, because this young man turned out to be much more mysterious and dangerous, and Kim Tae-young just smiled cheekily in response, making it clear that he now sets the rules of the game. The leader's face distorted in wild, uncontrollable horror upon hearing the news. He could barely stand on his feet, looming over the table in front of his stunned subordinates. Those who came with the report could only watch helplessly as his outburst of rage and impotence erupted. There was no point in holding back my emotions any longer. The situation had gotten completely out of control. The leader covered his face with his hands in despair, trying to comprehend the scale of the disaster that had occurred. All his former confidence had evaporated, leaving only the heavy, suffocating burden of defeat. Cold sweat rolled down his face as details of that fateful battle replayed in his mind. It all began at the foot of an ancient tower, where the heavens opened up with crimson flames and a purple storm. Wounded but not broken, the demon prince gathered his last strength to unleash his fury on his enemies. The halls shook from a series of devastating explosions, turning the battlefield into a living hell. Amidst this chaos, the boy seemed like a lifeless doll, resigned to his unenviable fate. He found himself captured by a cunning red-haired devil who held him tightly in her arms. With a predatory smile on her lips, she whispered words to him that deprived him of his last hope of salvation. The young man could only look up helplessly, realizing that the next attack could be his last. But just recently, he was an ordinary alchemist, creating potions under the supervision of his faithful spirit. But now his rival had summoned all his dark magic, preparing to wipe his opponents from the face of the earth. Enormous flaming meteorites rushed downwards, threatening to bury all living things in this hall. The devil only looked mockingly at the falling death and prepared her deadly claws. With one light swing, she literally tore the roaring stream of flame into tiny, harmless sparks. And her enemy could only realize in horror how limitless and terrifying the power of this creature was. She rushed forward, undeniably dominating the battlefield and instantly throwing back the enemy with a powerful shockwave. Even the protagonist, watching from the sidelines, could not hide his amazement at such a devastating display of force. A condescending smirk played on her lips as she extended her hand, ready to take complete control of the situation. However, the young man, although he was bound by her dark bonds, only smiled cheekily in response, without losing his composure. Their confrontation was interrupted by a sudden distortion of space deep within the arena, heralding the emergence of a new threat. The defeated enemy, breathing heavily and barely able to stand on his feet, realized with horror that his plans were completely collapsing. He screamed in impotent rage, trying to regain his slipping control of this battle. But the majestic warrior did not even turn her head, continuing to tower over her opponent in all her formidable grandeur. The guy looked at her in fascination, feeling the ancient and frightening aura emanating from her. At that moment, a hurricane of emotions raged in his soul, from distrust to sincere admiration. Her enormous wings seemed to cover the entire world, personifying an insurmountable wall between them. Noticing his gaze, she only smiled coquettishly, making it clear that she was completely satisfied with the effect produced. Then he finally realized that in this game, he would have to give it his all so as not to remain in its shadow. With a playful yet commanding gesture, she pointed him to his seat, causing the guy to only sigh at her unpredictability. But there was no time to relax, and he instantly concentrated all his remaining mana, awakening purple lightning at his fingertips. At that very moment, the firmament was split by a blinding flash, announcing the arrival of something incredibly powerful. From this furious radiance, a gigantic spirit of flame was woven, eager to incinerate all living things in its path. Following him, a colossal black dragon descended upon the arena, causing the very foundations of this ancient hall to tremble. With its mouth wide open, the monster began to rapidly concentrate destructive thermal energy for a deadly strike. Realizing that they had no room for error, the allies prepared to meet this crushing onslaught shoulder to shoulder. A fiery projectile of colossal power falls upon the ancient structure, crushing its strong walls. Amidst the raging flames and debris, a mysterious sphere shrinks, concentrating the primordial power. Finding themselves in the very epicenter of chaos, the boy and his demonic companion barely hold back the onslaught. Directly above them, in the ruined Colosseum, a winged nightmare hovers, ready to finish what it started. However, not a drop of fear is reflected on the face of the faithful ally, only an ominous determination. At this critical moment, the young man feels as if time around him is slowing down. She hugs him tenderly, enveloping him in her ominous aura and transferring the remains of her colossal energy. Whispering words of support, she ignites a new, unprecedented flame in his wounded body. Having gained incredible strength, the boy rises decisively, ready to fight back the monster. The enraged dragon lets out a deafening roar, preparing to incinerate the impudent upstarts. In a blinding flash of light, two irreconcilable and destructive forces collide. Their consciousness transports them to another dimension, where a shocked enemy appears before a majestic throne. At the very top sits the true Lord of Shadows, his gaze burning with crimson flame. The wounded enemy freezes in stupor, realizing the true scale of the alien greatness. The deadly calm of this throne inspires far more terror than any physical weapon. Every second spent here weighs on the guest's mind, forcing him to choke on his own blood, and right behind the master, something ancient, hungry, and truly colossal awakens. With just one slight gesture of his hand, the bishop makes a final, irrevocable verdict. The enormous mouth of the abyss opens over the unfortunate man, ready to swallow him up without a trace, and all that remains for the defeated enemy in the face of imminent death is the silent horror in his frozen eyes. A monstrous roar shakes the walls as the monster opens its mouth, choking on its own rage. A huge scarlet shadow looms over the hero, ready to trample him in this blazing hall. But there is no time for fear. Gathering his last strength, the guy takes a step towards the inevitable. The monster watches his every move with a burning, mad gaze. With one sharp movement, he tears off the cap of the bottle, pouring into himself the last drops of the unknown power. Pain pierces the body, but along with it, a wild, primal energy awakens. The beast rushes forward, trying to sweep away the impudent bug with one blow. A flash of rage and steel, the hero goes on a ramming attack, cutting through the space around him. The monster's huge mouth slams shut, choking on pain and surprise. Every cell in his body screams with strain, cracking under the onslaught of alien power. But even on the verge of hysteria, a cheeky grin plays on his lips. Those for whom he fights flash in his memory, giving a spontaneous impetus to his fading will. Overcoming the pain, he lets out a furious cry, turning despair into a pure weapon. Like a meteor, he bursts into the epicenter of the explosion, bringing down all the accumulated power on the giant. The dragon roars in humiliation, not believing that a pathetic mortal dared to challenge him. Bloody sprays fly into the air under the blows of the blade, tearing apart the monster's armor. The colossal hall shakes from the destructive shockwave, collapsing the stone vaults. Amidst the smoke and ruins, the hero can barely stand on his feet, breathing heavily and intermittently. He lets out a breath, realizing how close he had just come to the edge. But instead of the end, something much more grandiose opens before him, calling him into the depths of space. Every cell in his body screams in pain, but a mad grin freezes on his lips. He survived against all odds. Meanwhile, the final of a grand confrontation unfolds in the packed arena. Judges impartially weigh every recovered fragment, deciding the fate of entire nations. Another favorite freezes in anticipation of triumph, hoping to surpass the unattainable leader, but harsh reality hits him head-on, leaving him just one step away from the summit. Defeat echoes dully in his chest as he is forced to leave the stage in disgrace. This drama is being closely watched by someone whose stake in this game was exorbitantly high. With a cold sweat on his face, he realizes that their time is running out. After all, without legendary trophies and victory over a top-ranked monster, they didn't have a single chance. The awareness of his own powerlessness falls like a heavy burden on his shoulders. But a sudden roar from the stands makes him turn around, sensing the arrival of a true threat. Those who are accustomed to dictating their own rules in this cruel world are slowly entering the arena. Their looks are full of arrogance and hidden threat, which does not bode well. The heart skips a beat just from the presence of these monsters in human form. Two opposing forces come face to face under the blinding light of spotlights. A dull rage boils inside, clenching fists until they bleed from the unbearable injustice. He knows very well whose dirty hands are behind the series of mysterious disappearances of the strongest fighters. But the enemies only pass by mockingly, reveling in their impunity. They enjoy seeing other people's weakness and trampled pride. And the worst thing is that he doesn't have a single piece of evidence to stop this madness. And while the villains revel in their impunity, celebrating a false victory, right in the middle of the arena a blinding whirlwind erupts, causing everyone to hold their breath. The sudden appearance of an unknown person sows panic among those who consider themselves masters of the situation. But that daring look and condescending smile leave no doubt about his intentions. For the organizers, mired in lies, this uninvited guest becomes the main nightmare, and old enemies instantly recognize the one who dared to challenge them. After all, in his hands shines the greatest proof of their crimes, the lost artifact. He returned from the very hell, ready to restore justice once and for all. At this moment, even in the most remote corners of the city, ordinary people freeze in front of their screens. One of the hero's faithful comrades, languishing from boredom in his room, initially refuses to believe in a miracle. Without its leader, the tournament seemed to him a meaningless farce, devoid of any soul. He screams in despair, not wanting to come to terms with the unfair loss of his friend. But a sudden noise makes his loved ones open the door in amazement. Instantly realizing that something incredible is happening, the guy freezes in place. All eyes are on the screens, where a story that could change the world is unfolding. And in the arena, the shining crystal begins to pulsate with primordial power. Panic breaks out at the coordinator's headquarters. All security protocols have been breached. Analysts frantically peer at their monitors, unable to understand how one person could accomplish the impossible. And then the stands explode with a deafening roar, welcoming a true hero. He stands before a crowd of thousands, unyielding, strong, and ready to begin his game. But those who so strongly longed for his death now freeze in silent horror, not believing their own eyes. Anger and panic instantly grip the conspirators as their flawless plan has just been shattered into pieces. How did this daring upstart manage to not only survive the deadly Dragon Tower, but also harness the great power of a crystal of the highest level? Kim Tae-hyung's name now sounds like a death sentence for anyone who dared to stand in his way. While the enemies are stunned and trying to comprehend the scale of their defeat, the young man calmly leaves the arena. Behind him, a trophy of unprecedented power blazes, silent proof that he now dictates the rules of this game. But behind the outward composure lies a clear understanding. The real battle for survival is just beginning. Before he can take a single step, he is caught in the strong embrace of the man who believed in him despite everything. The sincere joy of his close friend takes Tae-hyung by surprise, making him momentarily forget about the harsh image of an invincible warrior. The old mentor cannot hold back tears of relief, because he has already mentally buried his best student. A warm, barely noticeable smile touches the boy's lips, returning him to a sense of home after what he had experienced in the abyss of hell. This moment of sincere unity in the midst of general chaos becomes for them the best reward for all the suffering they have endured. Meanwhile, world news reports literally explode with sensation, proclaiming the emergence of the greatest hunter of the new era. And while the press is blowing up a massive scandal, loyal comrades are already throwing the noisiest and wildest celebration in his honor. The fun is in full swing, and for a brief moment it seems that all mortal dangers are left far behind. However, this resounding triumph inevitably attracts the attention of those who are accustomed to deciding the fate of the world from the deep shadows. The very next day, the young hero is summoned to the association's main office for a serious conversation. The influential woman at the head of the table has no intention of wasting time on empty congratulations. She has her own, far more cynical plans for Tae-hung. The young man listens to the new rules of the game with absolute, icy calm, internally prepared for any turn of events. There is not a shadow of fear in his determined gaze, because now no one will ever be able to impose someone else's will on him. Behind the influential official, ominous shadows of his past deals and secret patrons are gathering. But the young man only smiles condescendingly, seeing right through all this feigned importance. The man in glasses feels the ground slipping out from under his feet from such defiant insolence. But before he can utter a word, the office doors are shattered into pieces by the furious onslaught. A heavy weapon, washed in fresh blood, appears on the threshold, heralding the arrival of uninvited guests. Fear grips the office owner's throat with an icy grip, depriving him of the ability to breathe. A whole gang of thugs, led by a madman who is eager for immediate reprisals, bursts into the room. The leader of the attackers revels in his superiority, demonstrating deadly blades hovering in the air. However, our hero doesn't even bat an eyelid, meeting this threat with his usual mocking grin. Such icy calm momentarily takes the arrogance out of the overconfident invader. Meanwhile, a web of cracks is rapidly spreading across the panoramic glass behind their backs. The deafening sound of breaking glass marks the arrival of a new, even more unpredictable force. Those who are used to resolving issues by force and without unnecessary talk intervene in the chaos of the battle that has broken out. A primal rage mixed with madness flares up in the eyes of the leader of the attackers. Defenders of order are angrily demanding that this madness be stopped, but there is no turning back. The fighters instantly group together, preparing to repel the attack at any cost. One of the strongest warriors summons blinding energy, preparing to deliver a crushing blow. Outside observers can only marvel at our hero's insane, yet damn effective tactics. After all, for him, this chaos is the ideal muddy water in which it is so convenient to catch his prey. And while the enemy burns in the flames of his own impotent anger, the game begins to develop exclusively according to his rules. A new wave of defenders is ready to enter this merciless fight, determined to put an end to the madness. However, their enemy only grins madly, reveling in his dark power and anticipating a quick reprisal. The allies are pulling together all their forces, realizing that they no longer have the right to make a mistake. The headquarters leadership froze in deep tension, realizing the full gravity of the impending threat. In this chaos, everyone tries to find their place while a farce unfolds in the background. Our hero calmly lays out his plan, knowing that the key to victory lies in control of magical resources. But doubts and fear continue to torment the hearts of those who are accustomed to only giving orders from the safe rear. The outcome of this battle will decide the fate of the entire alliance, and every wrong step could be the last. A barely noticeable, confident smile plays on the guy's lips. Everything is going exactly as he planned. The time for empty talk is over. Loyal comrades are the first to rush forward, unleashing the fury of the elements on their enemies. Green flashes of deadly energy illuminate the battlefield as the fearsome spear is brought into play. The attackers never expected such a fierce and crushing response from those they considered easy prey. The walls of the majestic building shake and collapse under the onslaught of incredible power. Every strike by the allies is precise, fast, and leaves the mercenaries no chance of escape. Shrouded in ghostly flame, the warrior cuts a path through the dense ranks of the confused enemy. Even in the midst of chaos, there is room for bizarre rescue operations and panicked cries. Powerful explosions and cross-attacks completely reduce the enemy's defenses to dust. But the maddened enemy leader still refuses to believe in his defeat, continuing to blindly rush into battle. Suddenly, shining golden chains tightly bind his hand, interrupting his deadly swing. And now, deprived of freedom of maneuver, he flies towards his inevitable death. The witnesses to this battle stood frozen in stupor, watching as the usual balance of power collapsed. Trapped in his own ambitions, the enemy tries unsuccessfully to break the restraining bonds. But Kim Tae-young only smiles mockingly, suggesting that his opponent play by the new rules. This gesture of arrogance ignites a wave of primal rage and wounded ego in the defeated enemy. The mad grin turns into a furious cry, foreshadowing a devastating outburst of anger. The space around him instantly fills with dozens of crimson blades, ready to pierce flesh at the first command. The deadly hail freezes in the air, obeying the will of the one who now reigns supreme on the battlefield. The realization of his own powerlessness before this monstrous force makes him doubt the reality of what is happening. But before he can come to his senses, a crimson flash cuts through the golden shackles, along with the very hope of salvation. The first merciless blow hits its target, leaving a deep mark and shedding the first blood. His eyes, once full of superiority, now reflect only pure, undisguised horror. Following this, a gigantic phantom awakens, unleashing all its colossal power on the defenseless victim. A desperate wheeze escapes from the chest of the fallen warrior, whose body is unable to withstand such a crushing onslaught. The look of the winner, directed from top to bottom, promises only one thing: a final and merciless verdict. Gathering his last shreds of pride, the enemy shouts out the name of his executioner, unable to believe that such great power has been acquired in just a few days. But this cry is instantly drowned out by the whistle of cutting air when the final crossblows put an end to the protracted dispute. Bloody splashes slowly dissolve into clouds of rising dust, marking the end of this furious battle. When the fog of war clears, all that remains in the square is the prostrate body of the defeated opponent and the silhouette of the one who emerged victorious from this battle. Kim Tae-young's heavy sigh gave way to a calm grin. Another obstacle in his path had been ground into dust. However, behind this triumph, the shadow of something much darker and more powerful is already clearly visible, patiently awaiting its moment. Having defeated the strongest opponent, Kim Tae-hyung revels in his own triumph, feeling that any door is now open to him. However, a sudden whisper through the settling dust makes him wary. The defeated enemy, choking on his own blood, only grins madly, finally realizing the true strength of the young man. With his last bit of strength, he decides to awaken the forbidden power of the great being, leaving Taehyung frozen in bewilderment. Space distorts, and the body of the fallen fighter begins to rapidly degenerate into a nightmarish mountain of living flesh. A stunned Taehyung watches in horror as something far removed from human nature awakens before him. From the depths of this crimson nightmare, hundreds of ugly teeth grin, eager to tear apart all living things. The colossal monster rises to its full height, revealing itself as the very embodiment of primordial chaos. Meanwhile, in the nearby corridors, silent witnesses of another tragedy stood frozen, the torn bodies of the defenders. The reinforcements that arrived on the scene were frozen in horror at the sight of the bloody massacre perpetrated by the unknown enemy. Panic grows with each passing second, urging the allies to move further through this nightmare. The spellcasters scream in fear, sensing that the epicenter of the disaster is already very close. Their path is blocked by a colossal sphere of raging, bloody energy, pulsating with an ominous light. The shocked mages cannot believe their eyes, trying to unravel the nature of this irresistible power. A thick barrier cuts them off from Taehyung, trapping the young man alone with a mortal threat. Inside this dome, the monster clenches its giant fist, ready to crush the insolent man. Taehyung barely manages to dodge the crushing blow, rushing into a desperate dance with death. The monster lets out a deafening roar, in which there is nothing but blind rage and hunger. But instead of giving in to panic, the young man grips the blade tighter, fanning the flames of his own determination. With faith in his own strength, he rushes into the attack, ready to prove that even the most formidable monster is just a pile of meat that can be destroyed. But the enemy meets this impulse with primal fury, causing the air to shake with a dull growl. Taehyung dodges the first attack, guided only by instinct and the desire to survive this mad fight. However, the monster's colossal blow falls to the ground with a force capable of splitting the very ground. Thrown back by the shockwave, the young man struggles to maintain his balance, realizing that Lao Feng's power has gone beyond human comprehension. The very space around them is distorted, turning the battlefield into an ominous abyss shrouded in crimson fog. At that moment, the ancient title of the Great One, shrouded in the dark secrets of the past, emerges in Taehyung's thoughts. Could it be that the enemy has summoned the same power that the legendary creatures of bygone eras possessed? Trying to defend himself, the young man summons a ghostly knight, but even this powerful armor cracks under the crushing onslaught of the enemy. And yet there is no fear in his eyes, only cold calculation and an attempt to unravel the secret of this monstrous power. Overcoming the pain, he rushes forward again, straight towards the descending giant hand. But the enemy's size is too great, and Taehyung finds himself caught in the grip of an irresistible force. The monster triumphs, confident that the pathetic man has finally been defeated and crushed. It looks down on its prey, reveling in its own invincibility. It would seem that the outcome of the battle is predetermined, and it is no longer possible to escape from this grip alive. The creature opens its ugly mouth, preparing to end the life of the impudent disturber of its peace. Death breathes right in your face, and only moments remain until your final breath. But at the most hopeless moment, a raging flame of Taehyung's true power bursts out from the very heart of the monstrous fist. The dragon's crimson energy tears apart the monster's flesh from within, causing it to howl in indescribable pain and shock. A triumphant smile plays on the young man's lips. Now he knows his next goal, and its name is the Great One's. Amidst the doomed enemy's piercing scream, Taehyung unleashes all his suppressed power to deliver a final, crushing blow. The tension of a battle that has reached its limit finds its outlet in the bloodthirsty grin of the winner. The monster's furious essence disintegrates in midair under the onslaught of a crushing blow. Tearing apart flesh and bone, the creature turns into bloody fragments that fall to the ground. Surrounded by the remains of the enemy, Taehyung catches his breath after successfully absorbing them. He quickly drains the potion, trying to restore strength to his exhausted body. Thoughts about the Great Ones are spinning in his head, because each of them is a being of incredible power. You can't count on their friendliness, and it's too early to relax. But the thoughts are interrupted by a sharp splash. The spilled blood suddenly comes to life and rushes upward. Taehyung jumps back, watching the abnormal movement with alarm. From the thickening crimson clot comes an arrogant and mocking voice. Drops of blood thicken right before our eyes, taking the shape of a pale hand. An invisible pressure takes the young man's breath away, and cold sweat runs down his forehead. A stately vampire lord with blazing ruby eyes steps out of the scarlet mist. Towering over the young man, the uninvited guest asks in an icy tone about the fate of his contractor. Taehyung's grip on the blade tightened as he realized with horror that he was talking about Lo Feng. The stranger's monstrous magical aura makes his heart stop with a premonition of disaster. With a casual gesture, the vampire activates the killing curse. Giant swords of compressed blood instantly form in the air. Taehyung looks up in panic as he sees the deadly steel falling on him. With a deafening roar, the scarlet blades plunge into the ground, almost tearing the young man to pieces. Overwhelmed by the enemy's colossal power, Taehyung realizes the absurdity of what is happening. These scarlet blades are too huge. Another crushing blow forces the young man to desperately shield himself from the blast wave with his hands. But the pain and rage burst out in a piercing scream as his body is literally torn apart by the monstrous pressure. A glimpse of the hovering foe brings a chilling realization that terrifying aura belongs to a true Duke of the Abyss. Taehyung doesn't stand a chance against such a monster now, but it's too late to retreat. Gathering his last strength, he calls upon his greatest protector, hoping to turn the tide of his hopeless battle. However, the ancient creature only smiles condescendingly, as if amused by this pathetic attempt at resistance. At this critical moment, Taehyung mentally clings to all his past experiences and those who once guided him. Every bit of his previous knowledge must now become his shield and weapon against a superior enemy. The mighty bone giant raises his gigantic fist, ready to crush the arrogant opponent. But the pure, concentrated magic of the Duke of the Abyss instantly erects a barrier of boiling blood. All Taehyung can do is endure it with all his might, hoping that his monster can hold out at least a little longer. The collision of two colossal forces produces a terrible grinding sound that makes space itself shake. With a mocking grin on his face, the enemy begins to lazily collect a new portion of deadly energy in his palms. He acknowledges the young man's strength, but immediately mercilessly reminds him that insolence is always punishable by death. Before the boy can take a single step, the crimson trap snaps shut, depriving him of any chance of escape. At that very moment, a furious column of concentrated flame rises up around Taehyung. Through the deafening roar, the despairing cry of a young man consumed by this merciless element can be heard. A colossal tornado rushes towards the very clouds, demonstrating the absolute, overwhelming majesty of a true monster. A raging crimson whirlwind finally obscures the battlefield, leaving only the question, will Taehyung survive this hell? Suddenly, a dazzling column of white roses breaks through the crimson storm, reaching into the very heavens. The ancient vampire lord Igman watches in bewilderment as delicate petals begin to swirl around him. A moment of confusion gives way to realization. He knows this handwriting too well. Straight from the blossoming bud, as if from another dimension, Taehyung appears, supported by a powerful demoness. Wounded but alive, the young man grins, realizing that his gamble worked as intended. Two colossal forces stand frozen opposite each other, dividing the battlefield into two opposite poles. Igman assesses the situation from a position of superiority, instantly recognizing in the intercessor who has appeared the great Iron Maiden, Rosaria. He offers her to retreat, arrogantly threatening to turn this battlefield into her eternal grave. However, Rosaria only mocks his cheap pride, reminding her old rival of his constant bad character. With a slight smile on her lips, she gives the only possible answer, firmly rejecting any compromise. At this moment, Taehyung learns with horror from his patroness that their enemy is the Grand Duke of the Underworld. The full gravity of the impending threat finally dawns on the exhausted hunter. Rosaria gently lowers her contractor, giving him a final, clear command to prepare for the worst. The space around Igman instantly distorts, giving birth to dozens of deadly crimson crystals. With a furious roar, the enraged vampire unleashes all his primal rage on his old acquaintance. But Rosaria only accepts the challenge with cold blood, rushing towards the deadly barrage. A crushing explosion of two colossal energies shakes reality itself, illuminating everything around with a crimson light. Taehyung is instantly thrown back by the blast, causing him to choke on his own blood. The already critical situation is worsened by the newly activated reverse mana flow. Losing his last strength, the young man understands that now he is barely able to simply hold on to this great call. On the verge of complete exhaustion, when his body refuses to obey, the young man realizes that he has reached his limit. But it is at this desperate moment that a majestic demoness rises before him, ready to take the blow. She admits that she has faced an incredibly powerful opponent, and now she will have to fight at the limit of her true capabilities. The young man's gaze is clouded with shock. He did not expect to see such devoted determination from the summoned creature. With a slight, almost mocking grin, she lets him know that their path cannot end in this dark abyss. Raising her hand to the sky, the demoness concentrates all of her colossal mana into one crushing sphere, preparing to fight back. However, her time in this world is rapidly running out, forcing her to hurry with the decisive blow. The Grand Duke only smiles contemptuously, seeing these futile attempts at resistance. From the bloody mist, a gigantic suit of armor materializes, clutching a legendary deadly spear in its hands. A deadly weapon rushes to intercept the magical explosion, causing a monstrous clash of two opposing forces. The surrounding space shakes, and the young man, unable to stay on his feet, is literally blown away by a furious blast wave. A blinding flash consumes the remnants of his consciousness, plunging his mind into pitch darkness. Slowly sinking into the cold abyss of oblivion, he bitterly realizes that every step he takes toward power only opens the door to new, even more incomprehensible enemies. But in the midst of this ominous silence, a strange, frighteningly familiar voice full of deep contempt suddenly rings out. From the depths of his own subconscious, a majestic shadow emerges, dissatisfied with the way the royal power is being wasted. The mysterious lord mocks the weakness of this world's pitiful titles and threatens to take the body for himself if the owner does not learn to use it. His crimson gaze promises great power, but the price for it may be too high. With a sharp wheeze that tears through his lungs, the young man suddenly returns to reality. He finds himself in the silence of a hospital room, breathing heavily and trying to calm his racing heart. Looking at his trembling hands, he wonders, was this nightmare really just another dream? The images of the horrific battle and fallen comrades still linger before my eyes, coloring my thoughts in blood-red tones. The words of a defeated enemy about some mysterious king persistently surface in my memory. Meanwhile, the friends and allies gathered at his bedside stood frozen in deep shock. The boy's fingers grip the sheet tightly as his mind tries to finally return to reality. Beyond the walls of this quiet hospital, the world continued to live its hectic life, unaware of what had happened. After all, just recently, the protective dome that held back the deadly threat cracked and disappeared. He himself then collapsed onto the cold stones, completely losing his strength and feelings right in the middle of the chaos. While others rescued survivors from the fire, praising the name of the new hero, and influential elders were already preparing a large-scale investigation to find out the true causes of the disaster. Finally emerging from the hospital doors, he breathes in the cool air of freedom with relief. But the ghosts of the past and the shadows of defeated monsters continue to follow him relentlessly. A sudden system signal interrupts his thoughts, reminding him that his power and rank continue to grow against all odds. Soon, wanting to take a break from the endless series of battles, he agrees to meet in a quiet, cozy place. His companion is sincerely happy about his recovery and does not skimp on words of gratitude for saving him. He only listens to her modestly, trying not to reveal the doubts that torment his soul. Moreover, a new, much larger threat from powerful rivals continues to loom in the world. The girl's amusing persistence and her attempts to turn a friendly lunch into a real date only make him smile slightly. However, new responsibilities and the approaching tournament do not allow the guy to relax for a moment. After all, ahead of them lies a journey to a valuable source of magical stones, access to which is strictly limited by law. But despite all the obstacles and the looming deadlines, an ideal plan is already beginning to form in his head. Staring into the cold blue, he is forced to admit the bitter truth. His current strength is critically insufficient to survive the coming storm. The powerful skill, Bloody Madnesses, which was taken from Lao Feng, still remains blocked for him. To awaken this power of the Grand Duke, he must consume the blood of a truly powerful being. Only in this way can he challenge those who rule this world from the shadows and uncover the secret of the king. So it's time to take the next step, despite the pouring rain and the darkness of the night. His search leads him to an abandoned old building on the outskirts. It is here, according to his information, that the mysterious master's distillery is located. And although there is a warning on the doors that entry to outsiders is strictly prohibited, without the slightest hesitation, he pushes open the heavy doors and makes his presence known. However, what he sees inside makes him freeze for a second. Deep in the dimly lit hall, directly in front of the giant face of Buddha, stands a lone silhouette. The owner of this place, without even turning around, dryly orders the uninvited guest to get out. But the guy didn't come here to leave empty-handed, and he confidently takes a step forward. His sudden and precise words make the old man shudder in surprise. The master's face instantly reflects a mixture of deep shock and hidden threat. Turning around, he peers suspiciously into the darkness, trying to understand who dared to disturb his peace. With a confident grin on his face, the guy declares that he came here for only one thing, to save his life. After all, this plain old man, Pan Che-su, is actually hiding an incredible secret. In the past, he was a legendary S-rank fusion master whose power was capable of creating true miracles. The distillery had once been a safe haven for him, but his bitter past lingered, reminding him of the price of great power. The path of the awakened is full of tragedies, and sometimes the unbearable burden breaks even the most resilient. Pan Che-su still remembers that fateful day when, at his son's request, he decided to conduct a forbidden experiment to merge other people's abilities. But the great mystery turned into a real nightmare, instantly getting out of the creator's control. The unstable energy tore the subject apart from the inside, leaving an indelible scar on the master's soul. And now, years later, a random visitor unmistakably points to this old, bleeding wound. The young man reveals his main secret, a vow never to touch the forbidden art again because of tormenting guilt. The old man stands frozen in stupor, amazed at how the stranger knows the most intimate secrets of his past. Consumed with anger and fear, he furiously demands that the intruder leave his refuge immediately. He no longer wants to have anything to do with the world of the awakened and break other people's destinies for the sake of ghostly power. The master's eyes once again flash with a former formidable power, ready to crush anyone who dares to disturb his peace. However, the guy only smiles confidently, because even the colossal pressure of someone else's aura is not capable of harming him. Giving in to the inevitable, the old man once again activates his legendary, long-forgotten fusion runes. But instead of the usual resistance and chaos, he feels something completely incredible. The young man's mind is absolutely clear, and his body accepts foreign energy with astonishing, unnatural ease. Pan Che-su looks in fascination at the perfect circulation of magical flows in this man's body. His hands, trembling with excitement, once again create true, flawless magic. At that moment, the old master realizes that a chance meeting has changed his whole life in an instant. This mysterious young man seems to have arrived from the distant future, where the laws of magic are governed by completely different rules. And now the two of them must keep a shared secret that will soon make the entire world tremble. Ancient rituals are set in motion, awakening a power that has lain dormant for centuries. But any great knowledge comes at an exorbitant price. An old man who has decided to pass on his legacy believes in his successor until his last breath. Channeling this incredible power through himself, the young man feels new life boiling in his veins. At the peak of concentration, the old master announces the beginning of the final fusion of their souls. The process has begun, and the secret hidden within the young man finally makes itself known. Supernatural abilities like the mysterious predator are beyond the comprehension of even the most powerful mages. This realization plunges the mentor into deep shock. An uncontrolled burst of colossal energy rushes upward, tearing apart space. Signals about the awakening of such a powerful source instantly spread throughout the planet, and the echoes of this event reach the very top of society in a metropolis on the other side of the world. In a headquarters hidden from prying eyes, those who decide the fate of humanity gather around one table. For the first time in many years, the strongest players in the United States are in the same room. The impudent Gregor Gale does not hide his skepticism about such a pretentious gathering. Enraged by his arrogance, Dylan Gray demands that he show basic respect to management. The situation is heating up to the limit, and the participants, tired of empty arguments, ask the leader to intervene. Cool-headed Cody reminds everyone that they are not here for stupid childish grievances and formal hierarchy. His icy gaze instantly silences even the most hot-tempered fighters. The chairman takes the floor again, turning to the main threat, the strength of Chinese national players. And even the insightful Montel Roman understands, a storm is coming that they can no longer stop. Nick Lowen is the first to break the silence, demanding concrete answers. But the questions being asked in this room only highlight the general confusion of those present. The association meeting reaches a dead end, as the scale of the threat exceeds all their expectations. After all, behind the backs of some of them stand entities far more ancient and bloodthirsty than ordinary monsters. The realization of this terrible truth makes even experienced operatives freeze in horror. In this silent play of shadows, everyone tries to hide their fear of the inevitable. But anxiety is growing, causing doubts about the success of the entire operation. Meanwhile, in a distant, abandoned shelter, covered by a crimson dome, a completely different drama is unfolding. The elderly master freezes in indescribable horror, not believing his own eyes. Before him appears a young man, whose power bursts forth in a crushing stream of pure energy. This incredible pressure makes them realize that a monster of the highest rank is awakening before them. But while some are gaining unprecedented power, others are just arriving in the country to contain it. The professional sniffer dogs are unhappy that they were sent into this wilderness just for Kim Tae-hyung. They are used to dominating and do not tolerate unnecessary fuss around other people's talents. And yet, the anticipation of the imminent hunt evokes in them only a prejudiced, haughty smile. Meanwhile, the elevator cabin comes to a soft stop, bringing the denouement of this meeting closer. Kim Tae-young comes out, completely satisfied with the result of the successful fusion of his skills. He mentally assesses the scale of destruction that he is now capable of bringing down on this world. His gaze becomes extremely cold and focused. After all, right on the threshold, uninvited guests are already waiting for him, eager to test his new power in action. Before him appears the cold-blooded and calculating Marcus Gore, whose confident grin does not bode well. Next to him is the formidable Gregor Gale, ready to rush into battle at any second. The protagonist immediately realizes the gravity of the situation. Legendary US national-level players stand before him. There is a heavy, suffocating tension in the air as they gather around the negotiating table. Realizing that any mistake could be fatal, the young man tries to maintain an outward calm. But his opponent only smiles softly, as if he is in complete control of the situation. Suddenly, the space around begins to distort under the influence of strange energy. With a silent apology, Marcus activates his hidden ability. The young man freezes in shock, instantly recognizing the legendary scanning system, the Zikkurat. Now all the information about Kim Tae-hyung, his true rank and hidden indicators are clearly visible to the enemy. Stunned by the unprecedented AA rank, the scanner realizes that this is a national-level player, whose strength, however, is still insufficient to defeat the great Lao Feng. Deciding to go further and study the young man's combat arsenal in detail, he launches a deep analysis of his skills, but the system suddenly hits a dead end. At that very moment, Kim Tae-young is enveloped in an ominous crimson aura, instantly stopping any attempt at outside interference. The space fills with endless access error warnings, completely refusing to obey the operator's commands. Such a crushing failure of the legendary scanner plunges the man into deep shock and makes him freeze with horror. The young man himself merely coldly states the fact his true power is protected from any, even the most covert, attempts to probe its limits. At this point, the atmosphere in the room becomes tense, turning into an unspoken duel where one wrong move could be fatal. The analyst's gaze is drawn to the guy's face, as the terrifying puzzle finally comes together in his head. In front of him is the #1 national-ranked player in New Korea. Now the leadership's motives become crystal clear, and he finally understands why the association's president, Kevin Yang, was so worried. This guy is not just a dangerous opponent, but an uncontrollable force of nature that cannot be contained within any framework. Representatives of the association are trying to weigh the pros and cons, striving to subordinate this force to their interests. They sincerely hope to find common ground, believing that their interests will ultimately coincide. However, in this complex political game, everyone places their bets, calculating their moves in advance. Even if the young man decides to refuse the tempting offer, they have a plan prepared for any outcome. A barely noticeable cold smile makes it clear that the guy is perfectly aware of their hidden motives. When he begins to politely but firmly express his refusal, the atmosphere in the room changes dramatically. The feigned politeness of the negotiators instantly evaporates, giving way to irritation. At this moment, a huge figure appears behind the opponent, ready to teach the impudent youth a harsh lesson. All warnings are drowned out by a sudden outburst of rage as Gregor takes direct action. The giant tries to suppress the enemy with just his menacing appearance and physical superiority. He revels in his own power, completely oblivious to how the situation around them is heating up. In his eyes, there burns only a mad desire to break the will of the one who dared to refuse. But behind the guy's back, a heavy darkness suddenly thickens, dotted with dozens of predatory burning eyes. This chilling presence makes even the most ferocious fighter freeze in place. A calm, almost mocking smile plays on the young man's lips. The realization of his own helplessness in the face of a true monster comes too late for Gregor. From now on, the dialogue is over. It is time to speak the only language of power that they both understand, and his brewing conflict is instantly transferred to a huge arena, flooded with spotlights. Spectators and organizers are frozen in stupor, anticipating an unprecedented massacre. But for the cunning businessmen in the stands, this deadly battle is just another chance to promote their guild. Opponents take their positions in the giant arena, stretching the tension string to the limit. Gregor Gale scratches the back of his head with a grin, his whole appearance demonstrating disdain for his opponent. But Taehyung only smiles coldly, throwing another daring challenge to the enemy. Gregor's grin doesn't bode well. A dangerous predatory fire flashes in his eyes. The next moment, azure flames engulf his body, turning the hunter into a terrifying giant werewolf. A huge clawed paw rises right above Taehyung's head, but he doesn't even think about dodging. A powerful blow shakes the arena, splitting the durable surface and raising clouds of stone chips. The stands explode with screams of panic at the sight of a real monster breaking free. Observers will instantly recognize the legendary and extremely dangerous skill, Heart of the Wolf. Experienced hunters understand that this ability not only strengthens the owner, but completely subjugates him to a primal thirst for blood. The pressure emanating from the arena becomes so intense that the spectators in the stands freeze in fear. The enraged beast rushes forward again, intending to literally trample the impudent boy. The werewolf's eyes, burning with blue flame, desire only one thing, the instant death of his victim. The dry numbers of Taehyung's status show that he is noticeably inferior to his opponent in physical strength. Gregor's characteristics clearly confirm his belonging to the highest S rank. However, Taehyung dodges the first attack with incredible grace, literally disappearing into thin air. Bound by rage, the monster throws its entire mass into the void with a deafening roar. Believing that the next swing will certainly be fatal, the werewolf raises his paw for the final crushing. But to his utter amazement, Taehyung stops the devastating attack with one hand without any effort. But dark magic begins to swirl around the boy as he looks with amusement at the 10th-ranked hunter in the United States. The beast, shrouded in shadow, lets out a primal roar that shakes reality itself. A cold blue flame flashes in the predator's eyes, foreshadowing imminent reprisal. Clouds of darkness, like living ink, rise into the air, obeying the will of their master. The observers are frozen in silent stupor, unable to comprehend the scale of the miracle that is taking place. The eerie, pulsating pulse of an approaching threat breaks through the static of the monitors. The monster's gaze pierces space, focusing on a single target. Beneath the vaults of the ghostly hall, in the shadow of the supreme ruler, the beast bows in submissive expectation. He feels the breath of death coming from the master of shadows. The blow reaches its target, tearing the air and leaving only a painful echo of force. But Taehyung only shifts his position slightly, as if dancing in the eye of a storm. His every movement is imbued with the primal power that exudes the cold of emptiness. The depths of his eyes reflect a determination that leaves the enemy no chance. A short moment, and hidden energy spills out, crushing the space around. The darkness in his eyes becomes unbearably deep, absorbing the light and hope of his opponent. With every second, control of the situation passes into his ruthless hands. A gaze full of icy calm pins you to the spot, depriving you of the opportunity to even scream. The figure of a majestic shadow warrior materializes from the darkness behind him. The sword of justice descends, ready to put an end to this short standoff. The Shadow Lord towers over the battlefield, embodying the absolute end. The beast, overcome by the majesty of its master, realizes in horror the inevitability of its defeat. Kim Taehyung extends his hand, releasing a crushing force beyond all imagination. The unyielding command to kneel makes the monstrous beast shudder with unbearable pain and powerlessness. Heavy clouds gather over the arena, foreshadowing the inevitable end of this mad battle. The next moment, a colossal pillar of purple flame bursts through the sky, consuming everything around it. The spectators in the stands freeze in deep stupor, not believing their own eyes. Shocked commentators try to comprehend the scale of what happened, as the outcome of the fight seemed predetermined. The dust begins to settle, taking with it the last breaths of despair of the vanquished. The once formidable enemy now lies lifeless on the torn, cracked ground. Taehyung turns around coolly, leaving the battlefield with a feeling of complete triumph. The barrier surrounding the arena hid the outcome from the crowd, creating a wave of bewilderment and heated debate. People are in a frenzy trying to understand how the clear winner was determined in a matter of seconds. But the main question tormenting the minds of witnesses is what incomprehensible secret remained hidden under the dome. However, the defeated enemy, having gathered the remnants of his pride, refuses to admit his defeat. Filled with a thirst for revenge, he erupts into a furious blue flame, ready to tear Taehyung to pieces. The situation immediately escalates, requiring immediate intervention from those who maintain order. A powerful blow cuts through space, preventing a mad attempt at revenge. The association's strongest masters burst into the arena, ready to harshly suppress any violation of the rules. Their confidence is unshakable, and their faces reflect the anticipation of an easy victory over the weakened rebel. Their every movement is filled with crushing energy, leaving no chance for disobedience. Deadly lightning flashes in the hands of the strongest of them, ready to put an end to this chaos. The guy can't believe his eyes, stunned by the lightning-fast appearance of the uninvited guests. Turning around, he instantly recognizes the new arrival as his leader. He straightens his tie with icy calm, radiating an aura of absolute superiority. The tension rises to the limit, causing the young man to freeze nervously. The arriving team stands before the giant beast, confidently taking the blow upon themselves. The monster tries to snap back, unleashing a furious roar at the impudent aliens. But the man in glasses doesn't even blink, coldly cutting the creature off mid-sentence. Behind him, a dark, oppressive aura of a true predator flares for a moment. The monster immediately senses a mortal threat and retreats back in fear. From the beast's gaping mouth, only a dull wheeze and a plaintive growl escapes. The former rival retreats helplessly, amazed at how quickly the tide of the battle has turned. When the dust finally settles, a heavy silence hangs over the ruined arena. The guy can only look in amazement at the people who stopped the fight in a split second. But instead of continuing the attack, a representative of the American Association suddenly approaches him with a proposal. The wounded enemy screams in indignation, astonished by such impudence, and the head is furious, because such a recruiting gesture was made right before his eyes. The guest continues unperturbed, declaring his readiness to agree to any conditions. The young man silently considers this unexpected and dangerous turn of events. The diplomat's gaze remains incredibly tenacious and calculating, and at that moment, a short signal sounds on the phone screen, switching all attention to itself. The long-awaited message appears on the screen. Yoshikawa Surara has finally come to her senses. But what she had to go through in the depths of her own mind can hardly be called a simple awakening. It was an endless nightmare, woven from primordial horror and madness. The dark, slimy bonds pulled her deeper and deeper, depriving her of the slightest hope of salvation. Every second in this abyss seemed like an eternity, filled with unbearable pain. She desperately tried to resist, begging the invisible tormentor to stop this torture. But her screams were drowned out by the ominous, suffocating silence of the illusory world. Her strength was leaving her, and the darkness inexorably tightened its deadly embrace. Before her stood the true master of this nightmare, a colossal monster that had taken over her mind. Kim Tae-young, looking down, only watched her pitiful attempts to save herself with cold contempt. Doomed to eternal torment, she fell into a bottomless crimson whirlpool. The only thing that remained was a soul-rending cry of despair. With a sharp breath, Surara breaks free from the clutches of the nightmare, returning to the real world. Alarmed guards immediately burst into the chambers at the sound of her heartbreaking scream. But their presence is unable to calm the trembling that still shakes her body. Kim Tae-young's shadow and his creepy tentacles were forever imprinted on the back of her eyelids. She asks herself only one question: how much more of this agony must she endure before the end comes? The subordinates begged the mistress not to make any sudden movements and to conserve her strength. However, despite the horror he had experienced, icy stubbornness flared up again in Surara's gaze. Overcoming her weakness, she takes the first step towards her new, changed reality. The door bursts open with a deafening bang, and Surara's cry of despair echoes down the silent corridor. Her wide-open eyes, frozen in horror, reflect a sight that makes the blood run cold. Right before her, a furious and merciless clash between two formidable forces unfolds. The uninvited guest only smirks condescendingly, dodging the deadly blade with defiant ease. But his rival, driven by blind rage and a thirst for revenge for the suffering his mistress endured, has no intention of retreating. Gathering his last strength, the faithful defender rises into the air, ready to unleash all his punishing might upon the enemy. His eyes glow with an otherworldly fire as he calls upon an ancient, forbidden art. From the swirling darkness, ominous ghosts of the past emerge, thirsting for fresh blood. The swift attack was meant to be decisive, wiping the enemy off the face of the earth in a whirlwind of disembodied spirits. However, Kim Tae-young only coldly watches this demonstration of someone else's superiority, without losing his composure for a second. He knows full well that even the most devastating attack loses all meaning if you make just one fatal mistake. And at the very moment when triumph seems so close, Tae-hyung unleashes his own, much darker power. The realization of imminent collapse washes over the attacker like an icy wave, causing his heart to skip a beat. A powerful blast of energy shatters the ghostly shackles, turning the defender's power against him. A deafening blast wave shakes the walls of the building, showering Surara with a hail of stone fragments. The defeated warrior collapses into the rubble, powerless, unable to believe the incredible skill of his opponent. Tae-hyung, meanwhile, walks slowly forward through the settling dust, declaring that his visit has very specific goals. Looking at the approaching silhouette, Surara can barely find the strength to pronounce his name with fear and trembling. Now he stands before her in all his frightening grandeur, like a merciless judge deciding the fates of others. And this moment becomes the beginning of a new, raging storm that will inevitably engulf them all. The raging elements tear apart the horizon, destroying the remnants of calm and heralding the arrival of true chaos. Those watching this madness from the shore try in vain to find traces of their missing allies. They are still trying to convince themselves of imminent success, desperately clinging to the illusion of control over the situation. But just one glance through the binoculars makes the observer freeze with impending horror. There, beyond human understanding, something ancient, wild, and incredibly hungry awakens. Hordes of monsters, locked in the abyss for centuries, are ready to break their spatial shackles and pour into the world of people. Their cruel leader loudly announces the beginning of a new, bloody era. Any sign of weakness or doubt in its ranks is punished instantly and without the slightest mercy. After all, the power of this monster grows with each creature it consumes, feeding its uncontrollable thirst for greatness. Now this army has only one goal left: to turn humanity beyond the barrier into food for its leader. And this waking nightmare is already ready to take its first step towards an unsuspecting world. Meanwhile, in the dilapidated corridor, Kim Tae-young approaches his fallen enemies with a cold and unyielding intent. Urara can hardly believe his eyes, peering with fear and trepidation at the silhouette of the uninvited guest. Shrouded in a sinister dark aura, the young man towers over her like the very embodiment of inevitable fate. At this moment, frightening images from dreams emerge in his mind, which suddenly take on real contours. Looking at the despair of the girl bending over her wounded comrade, he understands that the time for doubts is irrevocably gone. The heavy, oppressive majesty of his power makes the air around them vibrate with tension. The unexpected offer to end this torment sounds to her like salvation mixed with distrust. But Tae-hyung only extends his hand, ready to dispel the darkness that has gathered over them forever, and on his face there freezes a slight smile of a man who will no longer allow nightmares to control his destiny. A sudden tremor causes the very walls to shake, breaking the already fragile calm. Kim Tae-young instantly tenses, realizing that his premonition of trouble was not deceiving him. The catastrophe has already begun. Without wasting a second, he tries to warn the others, because delay now is tantamount to death. But before he can take a single step, the corridor is filled with uninvited guests led by influential people. An arrogant chairman of the association comes out to meet him, whose appearance clearly does not bode well. This man earned his greatness on the bones of monsters and the lives of others, earning the reputation of one of the most brutal leaders. Tae-hyung knows full well that this manipulator is ready to sacrifice civilians without hesitation for personal gain. With a hypocritical smile on his face, the chairman reports that the situation has gotten completely out of control. Tae-hyung's attentive gaze detects falsehood in every word of his opponent, foreshadowing an imminent trap. The tension between them mounts, turning an ordinary corridor into an arena for political intrigue and hidden threats. The association leader, throwing up his hands, is putting on a cheap show, hiding behind concerns for public safety. But behind the mask of goodwill lies a cold verdict. Tae-hyung is to be detained immediately. The guards immediately surround the young man, ready to suppress any resistance by force. Yoshikawa Surara freezes in horror, realizing that the insidious enemy has been hiding his true motives for many years. The chairman gives her a chilling look, promising to mercilessly destroy anyone who stands in his way. However, Tae-hyung maintains a remarkable composure, not even thinking of giving in to panic in the face of superior forces. He meekly allows his hands to be shackled with heavy chains, deciding not to create unnecessary problems for his allies. Turning calmly to a shocked Yoshikawa Surara, he asks her not to waste time and to go and suppress the breakout. The enemies celebrate their easy victory, pleased with how quickly they managed to isolate the strongest player. A triumphant smirk plays on the lips of their leader, but he does not yet know that he himself has just taken the first step towards his downfall. A calm, confident step echoes down the corridor, attracting everyone's attention. Even shackled, Kim Tae-hyung doesn't look broken, only a barely noticeable smile can be seen on his face. He understands perfectly well that all these iron shackles are nothing more than a temporary illusion of his weakness. The enemies only snort contemptuously, confident in their undeniable strength and imminent victory. But suddenly, space is torn apart by a colossal explosion, and right in the middle of the city, the gates of the abyss open. A horde of terrifying monsters poured into the streets like an avalanche, sowing panic and destruction in their path. The city's defenders are desperately trying to hold back this onslaught, realizing that they have nowhere to retreat. However, the portal continues to spew out more and more waves of darkspawn. The merciless creatures advance in a dense formation, ready to trample anyone who dares to stand in their way. One of the commanders rushes into the thick of the battle, leading the surviving soldiers. But the forces are too unequal. The huge monster easily intercepts the brave warrior right in the air. Caught in the deadly trap of a giant paw, the commander can only scream helplessly in rage. The monster mercilessly clenches its fist, causing the other hunters to freeze in mute horror at this brutal massacre. In this moment of despair, when hope seemed to have finally faded, someone's eyes flash with a thirst for revenge. Like lightning, a swift silhouette falls from the sky, instantly cutting through the enemy's flesh. The wounded commander falls to the ground, and the bewildered survivors cannot believe their eyes. Cody Wood stares coldly at the battlefield, his golden eyes determined to end this carnage. At that very moment, the battlefield is illuminated by a warm glow of healing magic, healing the wounds of the exhausted fighters. The hunters feel their lost strength returning to them, and the hopeless battle takes on meaning again. A woman whose magic can turn the tide of any battle and bring hope back to where death reigns rushes to their aid. Lim Ion grips her weapon tightly, feeling the flame of newfound power blaze within her. Cody Wood is instantly at his side, ready to cover his ally in the chaos at any second. Even though her body has not yet fully recovered, the girl is determined to give all her strength for the overall victory. Kim Tae-young watches them with concern, realizing that the enemy's next attack will decide absolutely everything. And this enemy does not keep itself waiting. A gigantic figure of the leader of the monsters appears before the hunters. The mad monster revels in its own power, awakening a sinister, primal thirst for blood. Cody Wood draws his spear blade, ready to take on a superior opponent alongside Lim Ayun. The air trembles as two irreconcilable forces clash, each bent on destroying the other. The monster's first crushing blow falls on Cody, causing the entire ground beneath his feet to shake. The hunter clenches his teeth under the incredible pressure, but refuses to retreat even a millimeter. At this critical moment, Lim Ayung rushes forward, pulling the rest of the fighters along with him. However, the army of monsters responds with a furious roar, ready to tear apart anyone who stands in their way. Kentarinas himself only grins arrogantly, confident in the superiority of his beastly power. Cody dodges a deadly attack, drawing first blood in his frantic duel. The giant understands that this man is mortally dangerous, and the slightest mistake will cost him his life. Gathering all his rage, Kentarinas delivers a blow of colossal force, splitting the pavement into pieces. Dust covers the battlefield, and the monster freezes in anticipation of its easy victory. But when the veiled smoke begins to clear over the deep crater, his confidence instantly evaporates. At the very bottom of the ruined arena, surrounded by a glowing aura of pure energy, Cody Wood stands unwavering. His gaze burns with a fierce flame, foreshadowing that the true battle is only just beginning. Lim Young's strength is already running out, and every moment of this confrontation is given to her with colossal difficulty. But there's no fear in Cody Wood's eyes, only a cold, primal determination to see this through. Against them stands a spawn of the abyss itself, ready to crush anyone who dares to stand in its way. The monster's furious roar shakes the walls, predicting imminent death for the daring aliens. With one precise and lightning-fast strike, Cody's blade cuts through the monster's flesh, ending the round. The crowd watching the broadcast erupts in jubilation, shouting the name of their new idol. The triumph seems absolute, causing the organizers to revel in their power and success. Their eyes turn to the one who, in their opinion, must answer for all the consequences. Kim Tae-young, shackled, only silently watches what is happening on the screen, realizing that this is a trap. However, the joy of the winners instantly fades when the threat indicators change on the screens. The system registers an anomaly on a planetary scale, breaking all conventional ranks and classifications. There, on the front lines, the hunters stand frozen in silent stupor in the face of the approaching nightmare. Even the unyielding Cody Wood feels the icy terror grip his battered body. Something so colossal rises from the bloody mist that the sky itself is painted in crimson tones. This is an ancient creature that devours the very fabric of reality and mourns its victims with tears of blood. All past victories instantly lose their meaning in the face of this irresistible, elemental force. The realization of one's own powerlessness falls like a heavy burden on the shoulders of the greatest warrior. Amidst the ruins and lifeless bodies, they try to understand how this world made such a monstrous mistake. Overcoming the pain and screams of his partner, Cody rushes forward in a desperate, mad attempt to fight back. He cuts his way through the hordes of ghostly creatures, knowing that there is no turning back. But the reality turns out to be much harsher. Cody realizes with horror that their strength is running out, and his partner can only watch helplessly. A nightmarish silhouette emerges from the crimson fog, carrying within itself a pure, primal thirst for murder. The monster grins madly, accusing humans of causing his father's death and demanding immediate retribution. Cody's golden eyes widen in shock as the enemy makes a lightning-fast, barely noticeable lunge. A blast wave of colossal power slams the hunter into the building's facade, raising clouds of concrete dust and debris. The girl cries out her comrade's name in despair, realizing that she is left alone with an insurmountable evil. And there is no mercy to be expected. A colossal column of destructive energy falls directly on her. The saint falls to the ground among the rubble, choking on blood and rapidly losing the last bits of consciousness. Reveling in his absolute victory, the bloodthirsty monster promises to devour anyone who dares to stand in his way. Meanwhile, a deathly silence reigns in the association's command center, instantly replaced by panic at the sight of the broadcast. Analysts are talking to each other in horror, looking at the devices that are recording an unimaginable threat level, SS+. And only Kim Tae-young, standing in the shadow of the confused employees, maintains a frightening, icy calm. He immediately recognizes this terrifying enemy, Kintamyeon, the great and merciless ruler of the uncleaned dungeon. The young man understands perfectly well that this beast is more deadly than any enemy that humanity has faced before. Hysteria is growing around him. People are begging the leadership to give at least some instructions in the face of imminent disaster. The head of the association bites his lip in impotent rage, feeling the ground sliving out from under his feet. His subordinates beg him to put aside his pride and urgently request emergency assistance from other associations. But he understands perfectly well the futility of these attempts. No one will simply be able to arrive at the scene on time. Nightmarish images of total collapse flash through his head, the destruction of the city, the death of the strongest players, and the loss of his own status. Breathing heavily from the overwhelming despair, he turns to his subordinates, not knowing how to hide the primal fear that is devouring him from within. He tries to shout a desperate warning, realizing that control has been completely lost. But before his cry can ring out across the hall, a swift, crimson surge of power pierces the air. Kim Tae-young delivers a crushing blow, instantly crushing any resistance from the high-ranking official. The head falls powerlessly to the floor, and the handcuffs holding the young man shatter into pieces to the terrified cries of the guards. Those present are frozen in silent stupor, unable to believe the audacity of this young hunter. Looking absent-mindedly at his freed hands, Tae-hyung realizes that the line has been crossed and there is no turning back. In the eyes of the shocked witnesses, one can see only the chilling fear of an inevitable catastrophe. Turning away from the defeated leadership, Kim Tae-young announces his decision to personally rescue those trapped. Against the backdrop of the ominous projection of the monster looming over the city, his retreating figure seems like the last hope of a fading world. The stunned subordinates only looked at each other in confusion, not knowing how to react to such a crazy step. Without a second's hesitation, the young man heads for the exit, ready to challenge death itself. However, in the deserted corridor, his confident gait is suddenly interrupted by someone's appearance. Tae-hyung freezes in surprise, wondering who dared to block his path at this critical moment. Meanwhile, outside, the once thriving city had already turned into a fiery hell. The streets are strewn with lifeless bodies, and the air is filled with ashes from burnt-out hopes of salvation. The strongest defenders of humanity fell one after another, unable to hold back the onslaught of primordial chaos. Death took even those who were considered unrivaled masters of their craft and the pillars of society. A wounded Lim A-yong lies bleeding and exhausted on the ruins she once promised to protect. Above this valley of sorrow and ashes rises the nightmare itself, a gigantic creature of the abyss that knows no pity. With a mocking grin, the monster looks down on his fallen enemies, celebrating his absolute and terrifying victory. Even the strongest fall when their time is up, and Go Tai-wook, fading, accepts his fate. With his last breath, he whispers the name of the one he sees as the last hope of this world, Kim Tae-young. But the young man himself never sought glory, wanting only one thing, to hold back the pressure of the abyss and not allow the monsters to break through. Before him, broken and deprived of strength, Lim A-young bows, her ideals long since shattered by harsh reality. She once sincerely believed that her power would bring salvation and help change this cruel world for the better. However, brutal battles quickly dispelled her illusions, leaving only the bitterness of irreparable losses. The path she chose was littered with the bodies of those she had so desperately tried to protect. And now, as the monster's jaws prepare to close, it seems that her own story has come to an end too. But at the most critical moment, like a bright purple flash, Tae-young carries her away from certain death. The creature freezes in shock, not understanding how its faithful prey slipped away right from under its nose. The wounded girl looks up and sees her savior before her, engulfed in a powerful stream of mystical energy. There is no fear on his face, only cold confidence and a readiness to fight to the bitter end. Ion can hardly believe his eyes, trying to comprehend where such colossal power came from for a simple hunter. But they are not alone. From the clouds of smoke and ash, their surviving comrades slowly emerge to meet them. Overcoming the pain and remorse for past mistakes, the surviving hunters declare their readiness to stand shoulder to shoulder. Tae-hyung accepts their apologies, because now there is no room for past grievances, their lives are at stake. His gaze turns forward, focused solely on the approaching threat. Realizing that its prey is challenging it, the enraged beast thunders into a new, decisive attack. Screaming at the top of his voice, Tae-hyung takes his step, ready to take on this unequal fight. And now the fate of this battle, like the future of all humanity, is decided in the clash of a lone hero with primordial evil. Suddenly the battlefield shakes, and a gigantic barrier of purest ice rises right in front of the advancing enemies. This sudden intervention gives the wounded fighters a much-needed respite, allowing them to retreat under the cover of the freezing fog. An impenetrable wall of ice divides the chaos of battle, causing the monstrous horde to pause in confusion for a moment. Tae-hyung looks up in surprise, not expecting to see the one who decided to come to his aid at this fateful hour. But Yoshikawa Surara, who arrived, immediately declared that she had not come here for a reckless rescue. Her thoughts instantly returned to her recent meeting with the head of the association, who personally entrusted her with this mission. That conversation in the quiet office still echoes clearly in her head, reminding her of the importance of duty. The stern leader gave a clear order: bring Tae-young back alive, no matter the cost to the organization. The realization that she was sent only as an escort makes Tae-young only smile bitterly. With his characteristic irony, the young man notes to himself the imaginary concern of the management, preparing for the next round. But there is no time for conversation, because the shadow of a giant demon appears before them again. The ancient creature doesn't have time to comprehend what's happening before the air around it begins to heat up with bloodlust. With a lightning-fast movement, Tae-young rushes into attack, releasing all the destructive power he has accumulated. Those around her beg the wounded Lim A-young to run immediately, saving her life from the impending disaster. But the exhausted Lim A-young only looks back in fascination, unable to take her eyes off the raging flames of battle. Meanwhile, a colossal cloud of darkness thickens over the battlefield, threatening to engulf all living things around. Defying the laws of gravity, Tae-hyung soars into the air, concentrating the power of his blade for a decisive blow. The monster tries to defend itself with its massive spear, but the fury of the human spirit is faster. A deep cut rips through the monster's flesh, causing it to howl in unexpected and unbearable pain. And while the enemy is stunned, Tae-hyung raises his hand for another crushing attack, ready to put an end to this confrontation. Tae-hyung instantly realizes that stealth no longer gives him the advantage he once had, as the monster senses his every move. The enemy strikes with a furious, sweeping blow, trying to gain distance and crush the insolent man. However, this deafening roar only makes the hunter go all in and call upon the power hidden within him. Right behind him, a gigantic, ghostly knight materializes, radiating an aura of primal fear. With a predatory grin on his face, Tae-hyung directs this incredible power towards his opponent. A colossal blade comes down from above, intending to crush the monster with one crushing blow. The monster manages to block the attack with its weapon, and is already celebrating an easy victory over the man. But the creature's joy instantly fades, replaced by blood-curdling horror. A giant ghostly mouth opens in the sky, carrying with it the breath of death itself. Taehyung releases all his pent-up energy, preparing to wipe the enemy off the face of the earth. Merciless fangs close around the centaur, cutting off any escape route. The legendary spear shatters into tiny pieces, unable to withstand the extreme pressure. A powerful explosion of scarlet energy tears the monster apart, turning it into a shapeless, bloody mess. The hunter breathes heavily among the ruins, trying to recover from such a grueling fight. But suddenly his multicolored eyes widen in shock as he senses a strange vibration in space. The surrounding world dissolves without a trace, giving way to an endless crimson ocean and a staircase leading into the sky. Taehyung looks around in confusion, not understanding what unknown abyss he has been transported into. At the very top, seated on a creepy throne of bones, a mysterious king gazes down upon him silently. Struggling to maintain his balance in the ominous silence, the young man instinctively clutches the hilt of the dagger, but the owner of his creepy dimension only smiles condescendingly, seeing in the uninvited guest another funny toy. Kim Taehyung feels cold sweat running down his face as he grips the handle of his gun with all his might. Right in front of him, reveling in his superiority, Lee Jong-jae merely watches his pathetic attempts at resistance with amusement. But suddenly the young man's body is pierced by a wild flash of unknown destructive energy. Red lightning spreads through his veins, threatening to tear the flesh from the inside. Horror freezes in his eyes as he realizes how much this alien power is getting out of control. The space around him distorts, and a gigantic, nightmarish monster rushes out from the bloody abyss towards the hunter. The monster's deafening roar shakes the air, causing Taehyung to freeze in the face of imminent death. A devastating blow falls to the ground, smashing everything around into pieces and sending the young man falling. At this critical moment, Yoshikawa Surara appears at the edge of the cliff, ready to intervene in this mad battle. Concentrating all her will, she calls upon the ice element to stop the unstoppable enemy. A powerful ice barrier rises directly in the monster's path, absorbing the furious blow. But the blast wave still throws Taehyung back, causing him to choke on his own blood from unbearable pain. Through the haze of agony, a mocking face emerges in his mind, making him doubt the nature of his own strength. Taehyung mentally returns to that mysterious space where the silent Igmun sat before him on a shining throne. He remembers that fateful moment when his weak, worthless life first changed once and for all. All this time he knew that his awakening was only the result of someone else's great will. And yet, this gifted power now belongs only to him, and he will never give it up without a fight. But the monster rises up again, not giving the wounded hunter a second to rest. A deadly blow shakes the wounded body, once again giving rise to bitter doubts in Taehyung's soul about the wisdom of fighting. Falling into the abyss under the weight of a giant fist, he asks himself only one question. Why did he continue to fight all this time? But before the darkness can completely consume his mind, an icy whirlwind cuts through the heavy air of the battlefield. Yoshikawa Surara rushes forward, pulling the wounded Taehyung away from the giant's crushing blow. Covering the young man with herself, she decisively blocks the path of approaching death, despite her own fatigue. Surara has no intention of retreating even a step, and her gaze burns with a fierce determination to protect her comrade. A stunned Taehyung, through a haze of pain, can hardly believe that someone is still willing to risk their life for him. Having pushed the wounded man back, the girl confidently assumes a fighting stance, preparing to single-handedly hold back the enemy's onslaught. With her spear at the ready, she fearlessly rushes into the attack, once again making Taehyung feel his own powerlessness. Watching her desperate impulse, the young man realizes how deep the gap is between his weakness and her will to win. Overcoming unbearable pain, he grits his teeth and makes the only possible decision, to get up at all costs. A dark, hitherto dormant force begins to awaken within him, demanding release in order to save his loved ones. Meanwhile, Surara is using his last strength to hold back the onslaught of a terrifying monster, whose gigantic body exudes primal malice. Taehyung tries to rise, enveloped in a crimson haze of flaring energy, but his exhausted body is already at its limit. A mad fire flashes in his eyes. He is ready to sacrifice absolutely everything, just to end this never-ending nightmare. But the price for awakening the power turns out to be monstrous. Looking at himself, he realizes with horror that his left hand has disappeared without a trace. The realization of an irreparable loss paralyzes his mind, leaving only a ringing emptiness where just a second ago there was flesh. Losing his last strength, he falls helplessly backwards among the ice shards floating in the air. Through the veil of dust and smoke, he sees the body of the giant defeated by Surara, spread out on the ground. It seemed that this mad battle was finally over, and the terrible enemy fell silent forever among the ruins of the destroyed city. But the jubilation doesn't last long. A sudden and merciless blow overtakes Surara, causing her to choke on her own blood. And her tortured body falls limply onto the cold stones right at the feet of the newly resurrected monster. The enemy mercilessly rises above the defeated Surara, ready to finally trample her fading life. In the shadow of this nightmare, the king himself is invisibly present, his sinister will guiding every movement of the bloodthirsty beast. The creature lets out a triumphant roar, anticipating a quick and easy reprisal against all who dared to challenge it. A deadly blow crashes down, bringing with it only absolute destruction and crimson flashes of pure fury. But at the very last moment, the monster suddenly freezes, feeling how primal fear paralyzes its movements. Through the veil of dust and flames, Kim Taehyung slowly rises, enveloped in an awakened, ominous, dark aura. His wounded body can barely cope with the colossal pressure, but the thirst for revenge forces him to overcome any limits. And as he turns his mad, bloodthirsty gaze forward, it becomes clear that the true monster of this battle has just been revealed to the world.